I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for April 5, 2021. We have two agenda items on our agenda item tonight. Item number one is Let's Talk Wheat Ridge Neighborhood Engagement Program Update. And item number two is a review of the noise ordinance that we worked on last year. I would like to start our meeting, as we do almost every meeting, with citizen comment. If you would like to provide comment on either of the agenda items, number one, the Wheat Ridge Neighborhood Engagement Program, or item number two, the review of the noise ordinance, you may do so at this time. Please, if you would like to speak, we're using the Zoom format, and if you would raise your hand in the Zoom format, and that's located generally at the bottom of your screen. If you'll click the participant icon, it's in the lower right-hand corner is the raise hand feature. If you would do that, we will recognize you and bring you into the meeting. And when we do, if you would please introduce yourself, give us your first name and your last name. If you would please spell your last name and give us your address. We would appreciate that. The time limit on each speaker is 3 minutes. You may aggregate time by having another speaker or two maximum to donate their time to you. If you would like to have that happen, please let us know when you start talking who you're speaking for, and have them available, hopefully, if we need to confirm that. So we would like to go with citizen comment, and I will go to Ms. Scheck and see if anyone has their hands raised in the Zoom format.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have Mcallister.
Okay, Mcallister, if you would please come on and introduce yourself, give us your address. You will have 3 minutes, and our Mayor Pro Tem will be our timekeeper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Also with me is my husband, who would like to go after me for his 3 minutes.
That'll be fine.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. On December 16th, 2019, our neighborhood attended the study session in which the council designed the new noise ordinance, specifying the permit system for residences and businesses. We were impressed with the deliberations shown and very pleased with the consideration that the neighborhoods like ours finally received. The number of 6 permits per year, each representing a day, was decided upon as a reasonable amount of permits, and we agreed with them that then, and we agree with it now. Our neighborhood also attended the August 2020 study session, when the formal vote was taken on this new ordinance, with an enactment date in September. I must admit then how disheartened we were to see this ordinance back before you again, without it even being implemented for more than 6 months. Again, we do reiterate our support for the new noise ordinance and strongly request that there be no changes to the 6 permit limit. There is no question that the city is getting more restaurants and bars that will occasionally want loud music. This is already becoming a problem on 38th Avenue and could become one on 44th Avenue as well. All the more reason to set a 6 permit system, as the multiplier effect of 2 or 3 businesses, each with 6 permits, can affect a neighborhood by potentially having 12 or 18 outdoor events affect that same neighborhood. As our city becomes noisier and outside events increase, it is important and imperative that the City Council keep to a low number of permits that protect our residential neighborhoods, but still allow a business to have a loud outdoor event periodically. This is exactly what you did in 2019. Please do continue the ordinance that you have designed. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to now recognize Steve Keller.
Hello, am I audible, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mayor and City Council, thank you very much. We all know that loud outdoor amplified sound events always will disturb adjacent neighborhoods to some degree. That is why the 2020 noise ordinance is necessary and is not an excessive interference by government. Our neighborhood strongly endorses the permit system and the limit of 6 permits per year. This number offers businesses a fair opportunity to put on such events while it protects the freedom of Wheat Ridge residents to enjoy peace in their homes and yards. Over the years, our neighborhood has been persistently distressed by frequent and obnoxiously loud live music, and we have fought against it from the very beginning. Our neighborhood and others now have some protection from noise imposed upon them against our will, and we must not go back to where we were before. The reasonable limit of 6 events per year was carefully deliberated by City Council. A business model of more events is a poor fit where the business adjoins a residential neighborhood. Neighborhoods receive few to no benefits from being adjacent to outdoor amplified sound events. The situation is always unfairly one-sided. The noise sources gain, nearby neighborhoods lose. Certain Wheat Ridge businesses believe that 6 permits per year is too low a number. We strongly disagree for 2 important reasons. First, a business does not have an inherent right to impose unwanted noise on adjacent residents such that the livability of the neighborhood is threatened. My rights end where they infringe upon your rights is an established American principle. Second, a compromise already has been reached in that the 6 permits are allowed. With 6 permits, a neighborhood is already giving up 6 days per year of the peace and quiet it previously enjoyed. Businesses were not ambushed by the new ordinance. A business owner should perform due diligence with the city before starting a program of frequent, loud, outdoor live music events. The city should not adopt a decibel level-based system instead of a permit system. This would unfairly force nearby residents to have to measure and monitor noise sources year in, year out. Also, everyone will have decibel meters, and there will be endless on-site haggling over whether the noise ordinance exceeds legal limits. With the permit system, the noise originator either has a permit or not. Nearby residents will know this, and thus the number of noise complaints will decrease. The city also should not adopt a reasonableness standard instead of a permit system. The concept of reasonableness is so subjective that making this judgment should not be imposed on responding patrol officers. They will be trying to navigate between the noise source and the complainants. In our neighborhood, we have seen this happen many times, and it simply does not work. In conclusion, we ask the City Council to value the peace and livability of our Wheat Ridge neighborhoods as the noise ordinance is deliberated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. And just for the record, would you please give us your name and address?
Oh, certainly. Stephen Keller, 4325 Iris Street, Wheat Ridge.
Thank you so much. Ms. Scheck, do we have other callers with their hands up in the Zoom format?
We do, Mayor. We have Aaron Mcallister.
Okay, Aaron Mcallister, please join us and introduce yourself and give us your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you for your time today. My name is Aaron Mcallister. I don't live in Arvada. I do co-own T-Bird Roadhouse, which is located at 9701 West 44th Avenue in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. Am I okay to talk freely now?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay, so we have encountered many different instances with the Kellers and a few other individuals that live on that block. The entire time, every band that we had last year, from the time that we opened till the time that this ordinance was passed, I believe the police officers were dispatched to T-Bird Roadhouse, and we complied with every command that they had. We also encouraged them to do decimal meetings. I've also sat with the police department and officers at that time who have read decimal readings at the individuals' houses, which the decimal readings are only reach about 50 or 60 at their property line. At any point it never reached 75 decimals. It rarely reached 70 decimals. We've taken video of the decimal readings, and at most points, the noise or the sound that could be heard at their property line is equivalent or no louder to the traffic that is on 44th Avenue. When we do have live permits, or live music at T-Bird Roadhouse, it does increase our sales by 3 times, 4 times. This last weekend, we did over $4,000 in sales on a single Saturday with only 2 bands, which if we were able to have another band that day, it would probably approach closer to $6,000. As one of the bands that we did have come in, they do come from Longmont all over. They do bring a following to Wheat Ridge, and those patrons do go to other businesses in Wheat Ridge, which also include, the Taco Bell, the corner store, buy gas, buy food, and they bring a substantial amount of business to the city of Wheat Ridge. We've had a lot of support from other neighbors on that block, particularly in between, and a couple other neighbors on that block as well. I have accumulated over 125 signatures within 1 week of even activating that. I'm sure you guys have tons of surveys that support T-Bird Roadhouse, support live music in the community. I think it's not the right time, if anything, to enact something like that with everything going on in the community as far as COVID and everything, to endorse everybody going inside to watch live music, because that would be other options that they have, or going to another city. And like I said before, the decimals were never a nuisance or a problem. We've had many neighbors from that block that have came down and supported T-Bird Roadhouse, supported the music. We have apartments directly behind us, and most of those residents, if not all of them, support the music at T-Bird Roadhouse. Am I over the minute?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, sorry about that.
We appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah.
Ms. Scheck, do we have additional speakers with their hands up?
No, Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hands up. I'm just going to allow the phone callers to talk so that it's easier for them if they'd like to unmute.
All right. If you are on the telephone and would like to speak at tonight's meeting on agenda item number 1 or 2, now is your opportunity. If you would please unmute yourself and ask to be recognized, we're glad to bring you into the meeting.
I am a neighbor in the Ira Street neighborhood and would like to speak.
Thank you very much for calling. If you'll give us your first name and your last name and your address, and if you'd please spell your last name.
My name is Laura Jenkins. My address is 9715 West 43rd Avenue. My last name is Jenkins. So I want to thank the mayor and all the city council members for the thoughtful work that they have done on this issue. As many of you may know, the idea of increased noise and where and how it is permitted has been an ongoing problem in this city. For me personally, the problem has been ongoing since 2011. I just want to say thank you for the fantastic work that the City Council has done on this. As you can well imagine, having to live next door to noise, whether it's industrial, industrial or live music, can impact the enjoyment of your own home. I live quite a distance from the T-Bird Roadhouse, and yet when I am inside my house trying to quietly read a book, I can hear their music. Now, having said that, I do understand as a neighbor, it's not my right to have 100% peace and quiet, nor is it the right of any business to have live music constantly infringing upon the neighborhood. So as I said before, I really want to thank the City Council. I believe that what people and what Mr. Mcallister are neglecting to recognize in this, he can have music anytime that he would like. He just cannot have music that has amplified sound to it. He would have to have permits for those. So I would encourage him to have music for his patrons on his patio. I think that's a fantastic idea. And then continue with the permits. Because again, yes, he can increase his sales, and that's a fantastic thing to do. One of the things I did participate in the I believe you call it What's Up Wheat Ridge app. I would just caution City Council members. I'm a person who worked formerly in marketing. That was a great survey. However, you had no authenticators. You had no way to show that people who said they were residents of Wheat Ridge were actually residents of Wheat Ridge. And you also had no way to verify that all of those people who were identifying themselves as business owners in this city were actually business owners as well. All it asked for was your email address. And most of us have multiple email addresses. So people could have presented themselves as a resident and answered it one way. They could have presented themselves as a business owner and presented it another way. And my final point I want to make is, to a certain extent, it's incumbent upon the city council to sometimes let a business fail. Because if they don't have a good business plan for the neighborhood or the part of the city that they're in, then when they don't do well there, another more appropriate business for that location can take it over. So again, thank you for the fantastic work that you've done on the current ordinance that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for calling tonight. Is there anyone else on the telephone or in the Zoom format that would like to speak tonight on our citizens' right to speak on the council item 1 or 2? Now is your opportunity.
Mayor, we have Catherine.
Okay. Catherine, please enter the conversation. If you give us your first name and your last name, if you'd please spell your last name and give us your address, you may go from there.
Hi, I'm Catherine Grant, 3881 Estes Street. Was there anything else I was supposed to add?
That should be good.
Did I get it all? Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that we've really enjoyed the Roadhouse, and we've seen some really lovely music and enjoyed being outside and in the community, and it had a real feeling of the community coming together. And in these times, especially when small businesses are failing and struggling so hard, I just really feel for them, and I'm so happy for them that they did have a good weekend and they made $4,000. And if they could just have a little bit of amplified sound, not split anyone's eardrums, I think it's a beautiful thing for the community. I mean, there's not that many opportunities for people to get together, enjoy something. So I just wanted to say we like their offerings, and we appreciate them creating a forum where people can come together and enjoy some beautiful music, or, you know, rock music or whatever they've got. We happened to see, or I happened to see something that was just kind of mellow and just really nice and enjoyable. And I hope that they can continue doing well and survive. And I think I'm speechless that somebody would say some businesses are meant to fail, let them. I see them as contributing something important to our community and something rather nice. So that's all.
Thank you very much for calling tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Ms. Scheck, do we have any additional callers with their hands raised in the format, or anyone on the telephone who would like to speak tonight?
Yes, Mayor. Next up, we have Lindy Mills.
Okay. Lindy Mills, if you would please join us and introduce yourself and give us your address. You may continue at that time.
Hi, this is Lindy Mills, 7105 West 35th. And I'm actually here with Nicole Kostelecki. She's a neighbor also. What's your address?
3490 Teller Street.
And we were having trouble finding the words to say what the last caller just said, and we just wanted to second that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for calling us this evening.
Absolutely.
Ms. Scheck, do we have anyone with their hands raised in the Zoom format?
No, Mayor. No one else has raised their hand at this point.
Okay, well, let me give one last call for a citizen's right to speak on any agenda item on our agenda tonight. Now is the opportunity to speak, and you may do so by raising your hand in the Zoom format, or if you're on the telephone, speak up and we'll be happy to bring you into the meeting. Has anyone further raised their hands?
I do have one more hand. I have Chris.
Okay. Chris, please join us in the meeting. If you'd give us your first name and your last name and your address. You may go after that.
Chris, if you can hear me, you are on mute. See if I can get him to unmute.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
This is Chris Chidley, speaking at 4020 Everett Street. One of the items I believe for the agenda this evening is to talk about the Bel Air review. Is that correct?
Yes, the Let's Talk Neighborhood Engagement, and that included Bel Air, so please continue.
So on the questionnaire that was sent out to the Bel Air residents, which I believe was generated from the initial residential review for Wheat Ridge from about a year ago, flagged lots did not come up. I would like that flagged lots be contributed to the discussion. The city planner had a meeting with a few residents last week. We brought this up, and as long as that is added as an item to the Bel Air review, that's my comment for this evening, that we discuss those.
Okay, thank you very much for calling. The planners are with us tonight, so they have heard your comments. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Scheck, do we have additional callers for our citizens' right to speak?
No, Mayor, we don't.
Okay, I will give it just a few more seconds. If you would like to speak under citizens' right to speak this evening, this is your opportunity. Please raise your hand in the Zoom format, and we will bring you into the meeting.
Mayor, we do have a previous speaker has raised their hand again. I believe that we only hear from them once. Is that correct?
Yes, we only have provide one opportunity to speak
Okay, thanks.
per item. Any further hands raised?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we are going to close our citizens' right to speak. Thank you all for joining us and speaking to the council. We appreciate hearing from you. We will now go on to our first agenda item. This is the Let's Talk Neighborhood Engagement Update. And Mr. Goff, I will turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're excited this evening to bring you an update on our first two neighborhoods in our Let's Talk program. And I will turn it over to Ken Johnson, our Community Development Director, to introduce staff who's been working on this and doing a great job.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. And thanks, Patrick, as well. I would echo, I think, that word that Patrick used, which is we're excited to be in front of you this evening to give you another programmatic update on our Let's Talk program. As Council is, I think, well aware, the 2019 update to the NRS had a strong recommendation to really engage our residents on a more neighborhood granular scale. And we've been pleased to have the resources to be able to do that. So thank you for authorizing the approval of two people to fill the voids to create that program. We were able to bring Jeff Hurt on in early 2020, and then later in October of that year, Ashley Holland, who we stole a little bit from Local Works. She's got some strong Wheat Ridge connections from her time at the Local Works organization. And she's been part of the program now since October of last year and has been a great contributor along with Jeff. So we're really here tonight to give you an update on the program in general, where it's going, where it's been, specifically to give you an update on what we've heard from the two neighborhoods thus far, East Wheat Ridge and Bel Air, as one of the speakers just mentioned. And then, really tell you where we're headed in the near future on the next two neighborhoods as well. So we're really excited about these two new additions to our Wheat Ridge team and what they've been able to accomplish, and really the level of participation that we've been able to achieve even during the COVID pandemic. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Hurt to give you a more thorough program update.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, we're excited to share what's happening with the program and kind of what's next. So bear with me. I've got about a 10-minute presentation as I get set up here. Okay. Can everyone see the slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So yeah, so this is the agenda item to update you on the resident engagement program. And our purpose tonight before council is to share both detailed reports and recommendations for what to do next, having completed our first 2 neighborhoods. And so as a reminder, this program stems from really one of the highest priority recommendations from the NRS in 2019. So you've been getting updates about the program over the last several months with emails, and we last spoke with you in September of last year, I think. But to spark your memory is this map that shows how the program breaks the city down into 10 neighborhoods for the purposes of sort of hyper-local resident engagement. And so with this program, we conduct what we call resident engagement blitzes in 2 neighborhoods at a time, with the goal of covering the city in about 2-year cycles. And so each blitz lasts about 4 to 5 months, but as this is a new program, we're tweaking things as we go. So round 1 of a blitz is about understanding what's important to people that the city can act on in a very open-ended format. And so we don't try to steer the conversation towards any topic, and we stay open to whatever the hot button issues are. So it could be anything from safety issues to speeding, to development, to parks, kind of whatever emerges. And round 2 is about developing a set of tangible actions that respond directly to what we heard about in round 1 and seeing what resident opinions are on these actions in these neighborhoods. And so the first 2 neighborhoods, as Ken said, were Bel Air and East Wheat Ridge. And so we've completed the blitzes in those neighborhoods, and that's why we're here before you tonight in part. So we're really excited about the interest that this program has seen. So for the last several months, in these first 2 neighborhoods, it's really shown that the 2019 NRS was right, that there is a high demand for focused engagement between the city and residents about neighborhood issues. So we saw strong participation numbers, especially when you factor in COVID and those challenges. For comparison, and what this slide shows is the 2019 NRS was considered to have successful and extensive engagement as about a year-long citywide effort, the 26-member resident committee, and we had about 1,000 residents participate in that effort. So for this program and just 2 of 10 neighborhoods in the city, over about 5 months, we had about 600 residents participate. So we felt pretty good about these numbers, and we had some really good conversations with folks that we'll give you a snapshot of tonight. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of sort of the who and the how we engaged here in the next couple slides. So these graphics are taken from the reports in your packet that sort of break down the specific numbers in each neighborhood by those that participated in rounds 1 and round 2 through both surveys and community meetings. Certainly tons of details in your packet if you wanted to dive deeper on all of this, and we're happy to discuss it with you tonight. So before we get into specifics, I'll just highlight that a primary outcome or sort of deliverable of each of these neighborhood blitzes is a Blitz report. So these are included as attachments to your packet and have lots and lots of details, including the specifics of how we reach people, what questions were asked, and what residents told us that we'll highlight here momentarily. And so there are also appendices in each of the Blitz reports with all the details on how we reach people in terms of all the specific sort of communications points. But here are a couple highlights. So we sent 3 mailers over the course of about 4 months to the over 5,000 owners and renters in these neighborhoods. And I'll also note that our relatively new What's Up Wheat Ridge online platform has been really a fantastic resource for us with residents registering on that platform and giving us the ability to communicate with the 600 or so people that signed up directly and throughout the Blitz. So I'm going to spend a moment walking through this slide here because there's a lot to unpack. So the Blitz report summarized in a pretty graphics-rich format what the residents told us. I mentioned earlier that round 1 is a very open-ended format. So from that open-ended format, these were really the topics that we heard about most in Bel Air and East Wheat Ridge. A lot to unpack within each one of these certainly, but you'll see in a moment what the action items were that residents weighed in on that tied directly to these topics and sort of the nuanced perspectives we heard on each of these. So I'll just walk through each of these briefly, and we can certainly circle back and do a deeper dive if you'd like. But regarding development, really the common thread across both neighborhoods with some nuanced differences between them was concern about development that's not sensitive to each neighborhood's more quote unquote small town character, which was a term we frequently heard, particularly as folks compare us to surrounding Denver and the scale of development happening in neighborhoods like the Highlands. So this more small town sort of country feel that we heard is a highly desired neighborhood feature among, what's interesting, it's a highly desired feature among both those that have lived in the neighborhood a long time and the newcomers. And so there's a lot of nuance to this topic. And again, the reports we think capture that pretty well. Regarding traffic and speeding, so each neighborhood has its hot spots, but in general, the concerns related more to local residential streets and cut through traffic. And I think Bel Air particularly, this was a particular hot button issue, the cut through traffic and speeding. Regarding pedestrian and bicycle access and safety, the concerns related back to traffic and speeding in terms of areas with sort of you combine having no sidewalks with also being cut through streets, those being hot button issues, and also the lack of connectivity that most of us may be aware of. And so we have some plans like the Bike and Ped Master Plan that aim to address some of these pinch points. We can certainly talk about what those are in each of these neighborhoods, according to folks. So, and then regarding supporting local businesses, really the main concern we heard was not only helping them through the pandemic and those challenges, but in general, filling some vacant storefronts and fostering Wheat Ridge businesses as an important element of neighborhood character, with an emphasis, not surprisingly, for East Wheat Ridge folks on 38th Avenue, and for Bel Air residents, an emphasis on 44th Avenue west of Wadsworth, and that sort of little pocket of commercial there. Okay, so in round 2 of the Blitz, we developed 10 neighborhood-specific action items with a lot of overlap between the 2 neighborhoods, and we asked residents to weigh in on which they support most through an action survey and community meetings. So these are the 10 action items and how they ranked across the 2 neighborhoods in terms of which ones residents would like the city to move forward on most. I'll note that residents were asked for their level of support for each of these, and they all scored high in their level of support. And they were then asked kind of at the end of the survey to rank and prioritize them. And so this list reflects their ranking sort of combined across both neighborhoods. So I won't go through each one of them, but in your packet and in each Blitz report, the specifics of sort of what they mean and how we might implement them are provided. And you can also see how specifically these action items were framed to residents. So attachment 1, so these next couple slides are staff's recommendations for action items to respond. So there's an attachment in your packet, attachment 1, that summarizes staff's recommendation for how to address each of those 10 action items you just saw on the previous slide, whether that be to request funding, wait and monitor how the issue tracks across other neighborhoods, or that it would need city council policy direction, for example. We also addressed how these topics align or don't align with council's 2021 priorities per year February 20th retreat and that ongoing conversation. So the good news is we found that council's priorities, as we understand them, really line up well with what we heard from residents in these 2 neighborhoods. So this in the next slide highlights the recommendations staff plans to address in 2021, and we're certainly happy to do a deeper dive on what each might look like, but I'm not going to go through each one of them in the interest of time tonight. So I'll just highlight a few of them, like street improvements that would be part of planned budget request in 2021 for 2022. And a few of these items we anticipate council discussions or updates as 2021 progresses, like the bulk plan and addressing accessory dwelling units that you'll see on the next slide. So each of these items has a lot of thought and coordination across departments underneath them. So again, we're happy to sort of call out any of them for discussion if you'd like. We also think the timing works really well. Staff is working with council in May for the citywide work plan, I think May 3rd scheduled meeting. And then the budget process for 2022 starts in June. And so, and we also hope to have the results of the resident survey available around this time too, if I have my dates right. So I have just a couple more slides on sort of next neighborhoods and next steps, and then we'll wrap up here. So our next neighborhoods are slated to be Applewood and Lepla Manor. And so we're happy to explain why these were chosen, but one reason evident on the map is for sort of the geographic distribution across the city and council districts. And so we've already started ramping up towards these neighborhoods, and the Blitz is slated to occur from May to September, maybe August of this year. And I'll note that we're learning ways to improve how we engage with people with the first set of neighborhoods now under our belt, and with warmer weather, hopefully more COVID-related flexibility to talk to people. We expect to have more and better opportunities to reach people in person. A couple of new approaches on this front will include recruiting neighborhood champions, as we're calling them, to help get the word out and get input. We're also planning to coordinate with the newly formed Race and Equity Task Force to utilize their expertise and input to better reach traditionally underrepresented populations. And then last, certainly the plan is, as we go through each of the blitzes, to update council throughout and to come back to you with sort of a similar update following the blitz in these two neighborhoods later this year. So our next steps are really to jump right into the next two neighborhoods starting this month. And we've already started this work with neighborhood web pages up and running. We've had an article on Wheat Ridge Connections, among many other things. We'll start by launching the round one survey that we call the Prime the Pump survey here in the next few weeks. We'll be setting up community events and generally getting the word out about the program with targeted outreach in these neighborhoods. And so that concludes our presentation. We'd like to open it up to questions, either generally about the program or about the action items we're proposing to advance in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hurt. Why don't we take the presentation off the screen so we can see everyone, and we'll open it up to questions from council. If you'd please just raise your hand, I'll start calling on you. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ashley. So that's awesome. It's really cool to see how participation didn't seem to be too impacted by COVID. And I know that also has a lot to do with how much work you all put into making sure that you're reaching out to folks. So I really appreciate it. I want to just address Chris's comments during public comment and him bringing up like flag lots. So I think that's a great outcome of this whole process, is that, you know, the issues, there were the top 10 issues that hit that neighborhood and that area, but this also is another opportunity for us to, if we didn't capture one of those things, our residents can still be a part of the process. And so I just wanted to ask you both how those types of issues, in this case flag lots, but anything that's not a part of the original, you know, outreach, is incorporated into your report.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm glad we're addressing that. So we took a fairly quantitative approach in terms of analyzing, you know, the several hundred open-ended comments. We went through a whole process of tagging comments based on specifically what the issue was. So, so I guess long story short, you know, flag lots came up a bit, but it didn't quite elevate to the level numbers wise of some of the other issues in terms of the size and scale of residential buildings, for example. But I mean, the good news is, and what we've tried to communicate with folks in these neighborhoods is, just because the blitz is over doesn't mean the dialogue has to stop. But this particular issue, this flag lot issue, you know, was not something that came up in our resident conversations up until recently. And it didn't come up as much in the survey data-wise. But I mean, we're certainly always open to different strategies to address some of these sort of neighborhood compatibility issues. But I guess long story short, it wasn't quite on that level, looking kind of as you aggregate all the feedback across all of Bel Air residents to kind of raise to that top level. I don't know if Ashley, you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I just want to mention that all the details are in the appendix at the end of each report. And so you can find the notes from the conversation that we had with Chris and his neighbors in there, and all of the open-ended survey responses as well.
Okay, that's, I'm so sorry. Just, so I guess the thing that I'd like to make really clear to residents too is that this is one way that we're engaging with residents, but also, like, if there are issues with flag lots and you need to talk about those, there's other ways to also, you know, work with council and all of us. This isn't the only avenue. So we can still have those conversations about flag lots, even if it's not in that list of top 10. Right?
Yeah, and that's a great comment, and I think, like, we had a meeting last week where this came up, and I think it was successful in the sense of we made folks aware that the conversation didn't have to stop here, and that folks could always come to council to kind of share their opinions on specific issues. And I like to think that's the result of Chris being here tonight, was knowing and having that conversation last week that there is an outlet and a portal. And so we were able to use that conversation too, not to talk too much about this, but to have a pretty detailed conversation about how flag lots work and kind of their history and their evolution. And so while we don't have a specific action item laid out for it, it was helpful, and I think a positive outcome to have had that conversation through this portal.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver and then Ms. Hulteen.
I don't want to belabor the conversation about flag lots, but it's something that has come up over the last few years in Planning Commission. And I was just kind of curious, Ken, if you could speak to sort of how we can, because the one thing I learned in Planning Commission was that the flag lots are so individual, and it's this issue of legacy Wheat Ridge and allowing access to these inner parcels. And I'm just kind of curious, how might council, because we're not necessarily to liaison with Planning Commission, how might we think about flag lots generally when, at least in my experience, they were all very, very unique? And I just was wondering, Ken, if you had any thoughts on how to think about flag lots as a body with council versus sort of looking at the specifics in a situation in Planning Commission. Does that make sense as a question? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a relatively simple issue, but with some complicated layers as well. I guess the first comment that I would make is that the way the city lays out, kind of parcel wise, there are actually many situations that come up where you have a property that's oversized relative to the minimum lot size for the applicable zoning district, and is also at the same time very deep. So from a pure physical perspective, there are many instances where the potential for a flag lot exists, and so I think perhaps because of that, our zoning code anticipates that they may be allowed. From a procedural standpoint, just to give a little bit of history, we last comprehensively updated our subdivision regulations, which is Article 4 of the zoning code. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeff, but 2014.
Yep.
And it was a repeal and reenactment. And that didn't deal specifically with flag lots. What it did do was make some minor adjustments to what was eligible for administrative review and approval. So currently, based on that code amendment that was adopted by council in that year, 2014, up to 3 lot subdivisions can be approved administratively. And those certainly can, in some cases, include, flag lots. So that kind of procedurally is where we stand. Larger subdivisions, 4 and 5 lots require planning commission review, and larger than that, or under certain other circumstances, require city council approval. So there's certainly the possibility that, flag lot subdivisions, if you will, can be approved administratively or by the planning commission without coming to city council. Because the topic had come up from certain members of the community and the planning commission as well, it was a topic of discussion more recently, and there was discussion by council whether to modify the regulations pertaining to flag lots, and ultimately council chose not to take action in that regard. And so that could have been up to and including not allowing flag lots, or it had also been suggested consideration that you could require a different approval process for a subdivision containing a flag lot, such as it would automatically trigger either planning commission or planning commission and city council review. And again, City Council, in considering those options, chose not to make those modifications. So that's kind of the lay of the land, if you will, in terms of what's allowed and isn't allowed, what the process is, and kind of where we've been from a historical perspective in considering the issue.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just start by thanking Jeff and Ashley for all their work on this, as I participated, mostly listening, but sometimes as a neighbor participated, and the conversations that neighbors had in the small groups were, I think, really, really rich. And, you know, the goal of the NRS when this recommendation came forward was the listening and engagement part. And to that end, I think that this is just highly successful first round, and it's exciting to see what's going to happen in the next round. I do have a couple of questions. The first one is really just seeking a clarification that it seems like some of the data that's come out of this and recommendations kind of like range from the neighborhood or neighborhood district level, like up to citywide level. So can you provide a little clarification, like we're seeing specific recommendations around improving bike ped access on and safety on 35th Avenue, which is like very specific to that neighborhood, against a recommendation for increased funding for the neighborhood traffic management program. So can you just give a little clarification about how you're balancing like recommendations at the neighborhood specific level versus recommendations that would in effect come out of a neighborhood but benefit the city as a whole? And then I have a second question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and we've thought about that certainly. So, so I guess the short answer is that the action items we're looking to move forward, we've evaluated them as, in our opinion, having a potential citywide benefit without being a neighborhood specific issue. So the neighborhood traffic management program, for example, we see as having a citywide benefit. You know, dumpster and cleanup days, the same. Improving communications on development projects, the same. A lot of those line up to, in our opinion, having a lot of pros and not many cons in terms of applying it across other neighborhoods. We could have a discussion about the bulk plan and ADUs, and I think that'll evolve, but citing your specific example of 35th Avenue. So in that case, and I think it may be the case going forward, that specific, you know, segment of road, and I think it would apply to other similar type of recommendations, has solid, before we started talking to people, already had kind of solid backing, being in the council adopted bike and ped master plan from whatever year that was, 2016, relatively recent. So it had already sort of been prioritized. And then in talking to our engineers internally, we all sort of like nodded our heads like, yeah, that one's kind of overdue. Specifically, it's not just because these neighborhoods happen to bring it up at this moment. We've been thinking about that one for years. So that one, it seemed like it elevated to a point where, while it is neighborhood specific, it's been on our radar a long time. And we could talk more about that specific one too, in terms of how it connects with Denver's neighborhood bikeway across Sheridan and things of that nature. So, so it's a balance, but I guess in the staff opinions, the ones we're looking to move forward on either have already sort of clear plan guidance, policy guidance, or we see a lot of citywide benefits from moving forward. And then you had a second question, or if that answers your question, if you want to.
Yeah, I think it does. I just wasn't sure, like if we're seeing that increase in budget for the neighborhood traffic management, if that would be specific to the neighborhoods who identified it as a priority, if those funds would be made available citywide.
I'll maybe answer that one, Jeff. Thanks for the question, Ms. Hulteen. You know, I think we've seen an uptick in interest in the NTMP over the last several years as well, separate from this engagement. I think this engagement process just heightened our awareness of that. So we have kind of an ongoing queue of neighborhoods or smaller geographies that are having those discussions, and there are several potential NTMP, you know, projects that are in the hopper. Again, as we've noted, it will definitely be a budget discussion for this upcoming, you know, budget cycle. So the timing's good. So I would say, well, it's come up in these two neighborhoods specifically, that it would not be, you know, our recommendation that that we just, designate the funds to these neighborhoods, that we just kind of keep the program moving forward as it has, and keep processing the requests kind of as we have in the past, which is, taking them in order, and just having, if council so approves, just having more resources to both to staff it and then to, have a line item in the capital improvement budget to be able to, fund a certain number of these projects in any given year. So I don't think we'll propose to limit the geography based on where we started, which is in the East Wheat Ridge and Bel Air neighborhoods. Though I would say that there are definitely projects in the hopper, I think in the Bel Air neighborhood and also in East Wheat Ridge. So there is that alignment as well.
Okay, thank you, Ken. That's helpful. Just a last comment on that. And my other quick question is, I'm glad we have the neighborhood traffic management plan. I think there's some efficacy issues with it in terms of how, we're studying one block and how addressing that block creates problems on the adjacent block. And it's a reactive and not proactive program. So won't go any further here, but if we are looking at increasing that budget, I would like to propose at some point that we actually take a study and review the program itself and consider proactive elements to it so that we're actually systematically addressing some of the issues. My other question is, having sat in on a lot of these and paid attention to a lot of the discussions, in almost every meeting I was in, the majority of people were very interested in citywide trash collection. And I did not see that come through. And I'm just curious what happened to that, because it was a hot item in, I think, 4 or 5 of the things I sat in on.
Yeah, we heard about that one in the round 1 survey, and we kind of ran the numbers, so to speak, on the number of comments, and it wasn't quite at the top tier. And so, well, maybe to back up, our process for kind of how we vetted these topics were, we did the round 1 survey and we analyzed the data, and then the resident conversations were sort of subsequent to that survey, where we said, here's what we're hearing so far, here are the key topics, trash being one of them that was up there. So maybe 10, 15 topics. And so we basically asked folks, whether it was 10 or 20 or 30 people in the conversation, is this the right list? Are these the most important things to you? What should come off? What should be added? And through those conversations, it was a bit of a culling that happened. And not to say that trash is not a hot button issue, certainly it is, and we know what's going on in Arvada, but it didn't quite get there in terms of as we vetted these things. So, but again, not to say it's not an issue and we shouldn't move forward on it, and that's the end of the conversation, but our kind of analysis didn't yield that result, at least.
Okay, great, thank you, that's really helpful.
Thank you very much. Additional questions or comments from council? Please raise your hand. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jeff, for all your hard work on this, and appreciate Ashley and everybody's work on reaching out to so many residents. You touched on it briefly regarding the strategic plan and the retreat that we had and the results that came out of that and how that intersects with this. And I haven't seen really any sort of comparison to see how those intersect. Is that planned in the future, or how do we compare what we're doing here to what we did at the retreat?
Yeah, so in your packet, and there's a lot in there, the 10 action items that we have laid out, we've got kind of a line item that looks at how they do or don't align with your priorities as we understand them currently, and I know it's evolving a bit, but so we did that a bit of that analysis that is a bit buried in your packet. So for example, we know that moving forward with bulk plane or expanding bulk plane to more residential areas was a high priority, and so we noted that. And I'm trying to think of some other examples, but that was a part of our thinking, and part of our formulating these action items to bring before you tonight was how they do or don't align with what we heard from council back in February.
Yeah, I would just add, just cherry picking a couple additional items. Mr. Urban would be 38th Avenue streetscape was a priority in both of these processes, your city council process and our Let's Talk process. And furthering the discussion on ADUs was another one that's, a council priority and also aligned with what we were hearing at the Let's Talk level.
Then maybe an example that doesn't align is the improved 35th Avenue for walking and bicycling. That did not come up as a high priority during the council retreat, but it did during the Let's Talk program.
So I guess kind of moving forward, how do we marry those two sort of, I don't want to call them disparate paths, but how do we manage a priority on this list compared to the priorities that we developed through the strategic process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Mr. Urban. I think it's based on capacity. Obviously, council gave us a marching orders on 8 different priorities at the council retreat. And then some from Let's Talk align and some don't. So I think we're going to have to, as staff, when we bring back, as Jeff mentioned, we're coming back to council in May with some draft work plans for your council priorities. I think we'll look at how these fit into that and how much other items that came out of Let's Talk that did not come up in the council priorities, how many of those we can add to our work plate for the next couple of years. And in the end, I guess it's up to you and the rest of the council to decide what's a higher priority. If there's conflicting priorities, then we don't have the capacity to do both. I don't know if that.
And I guess one last sort of concern I have relative to taking action, and I think we should be listening to the residents and we should be taking action on what they say is a priority. But I'm curious, as we look at other parts of the city and their thoughts on priorities and how that looks as we begin to sort of take action on these specific projects, and other neighborhoods say, no, that's not a priority for us. What's the detriment of waiting until those other neighborhoods are surveyed before we take these or commit to taking these to action?
Yeah, I think I just maybe piggyback on Patrick's comments. I mean, I think it's just an ongoing balancing act. Some of these issues that come up that may be, more neighborhood oriented or a focus of one neighborhood versus another neighborhood, to some extent they can be tackled on a neighborhood scale, and we don't need to understand fully what the rest of the city feels on that through this rollout of the Let's Talk program. So that's one aspect. And then, so I think there are things that we can continue to pick off. I mean, I think we've used the phrase, maybe overused it, but that we want to be able to, walk and chew gum and be able to accomplish some of the things both on your strategic plan for certain, as well as the issues that we're hearing through this program. And some of those will make sense to do before we hear from other neighborhoods, and some may, be better off to wait and see if there's more of a larger consensus on that topic, because it's a topic that really should be tackled on a larger scale. So I think we'll just continue to evaluate those. And as Patrick alluded, I mean, I think it, ultimately, both the list from City Council and the list from this program, some of those are low-hanging fruit, and we can knock them off sooner than later. And some of them are a bigger lift, and we'll have to kind of queue them up in the list of priorities to make sure that we have the resources, whether it be staff or, capital funding, to be able to knock them off in a systematic way over time.
Thank you.
And I know that we've been, I know we're having conversations internally about the very question of how do we marry council's priorities with this program's priorities. So specifically, for example, the communications piece, I know that was one of the highest council priorities in terms of sort of resident engagement, in terms of, so the way we framed it, it was very development focused. I think council's lens on that is a little bit broader. So we're having those types of conversations to figure out how to align these two worlds. But yeah, it's definitely gonna be ongoing, and we'll stay flexible with the program.
Thank you. I have Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to Jeff and Ashley and Ken for all of your hard work on this. I really appreciate these types of reports. I read every page, every single comment on every page for East Wheat Ridge, because it helps us, it gives us data points, and it gives us a roadmap of, you know, where are we going down the road for our community? What is it that's important to them? And so I appreciate all the work you put into this, and I really appreciated a lot of the things that I heard from the report. I mostly appreciate our residents for sharing their time with us to give us this information. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo Ms. Hoppy's gratitude for our residents. I'm kind of laughing because I was not on council probably about 6 or 7 years ago when council approved funding for 35th Avenue. So it'll be nice to actually see it happen. I'm excited to see that. To Mr. Urban's point, having been in a lot of the conversations and done the surveys myself as a resident, as well as to, you know, observe as a representative, I think it's important when we're communicating with our residents that the information is both to understand at the neighborhood level what the residents of those neighborhoods feel, and to communicate that some of this stuff is being considered citywide versus understanding what's specific to their neighborhood, so that there isn't confusion or frustration moving forward. So I think maybe just clarifying a little bit better in the communications that some of these topics are topics that are going to be really considered at a city level for policy or for funding, as opposed to specific areas of concerns or projects or overlay district type ideas that would be specific to the neighborhood, just so that understanding is consistent with the residents. And then something that didn't come through too strongly, and this is a fire hose data year between this and the survey and all of the great online input we're getting through other mechanisms. Like to Ms. Hoppy's point, we have a lot of great input, but I think, you know, parks are really important in the neighborhoods, and I don't really remember like that much sort of like opportunity or specific questions about relationships to parks. So I don't know if that's something that's been considered that could be incorporated. I know we're doing a master plan update this year, but that's just a suggestion. And other than that, yeah, I just like Ms. Hoppy, I read every page, and I really appreciate since both of these were in District 2 as well as the upcoming round 2 will round out round 2 or District 2. So I really appreciate all the data. It really helps a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Jeff and Ashley, thank you guys for all your hard work. Ms. Hulteen and I were on the NRS and kind of helped launch this. But I just had a question as far as the engagement piece of it. How do you guys feel you guys did as far as your numbers on engagement in the neighborhoods? Did you have certain targets you were trying to hit, or was it just kind of let's put it all out there, see what happens? How systematic were you as far as that goes? And I guess the second part of that question is what worked really well? I know the Prime the Pump survey kind of worked pretty well, but what else worked really well in getting people out and into the conversations?
Yeah, I can. Ashley, you unmuted yourself. You have more expertise on this subject. If you want to chime in, I'm happy to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Jump in if I forget anything. To the second part of your question of what worked really well, we sent several postcards to every household, as Jeff mentioned in the presentation, and that got us a lot of people who took that first Prime the Pump survey. And with taking the survey, we were able to have them register on What's Up Wheat Ridge, which is an incredible tool. So having all of that, having people's contact information early on and having follow-up conversations of, now please join us for a virtual meeting if you can. You can do an on-demand meeting if you can't make the regularly scheduled virtual meetings. please take this second survey. We really got a great group of people from the postcards. So we had 2 postcards go out before the first survey, and then a third postcard in between rounds 1 and 2. So those were really helpful. And also we had yard signs around the neighborhood at the public parks. We also gave yard signs to individuals to put in their yards. And it had a QR code that took people directly to the website to take the survey. And we had a lot of people who came to meetings and took the survey mention, oh, you know, I was at so-and-so park and I saw this yard sign and that's how I got involved. So we really tried to get to people in a lot of different ways. I think the variety was key in engagement, and social media, doing some things on Nextdoor, which makes it really easy to target individual neighborhoods. We kind of really tried to get to people as many ways as possible.
Yeah, thanks. And one quick point on the Nextdoor thing is we were deliberate in aligning the program neighborhoods with Nextdoor neighborhoods to the extent possible. So I don't know how much folks know about how Nextdoor works. I'm still learning, but you really can, as Ashley said, say we just want to do a blast to folks in this neighborhood, and you get a lot of good data in terms of open rates and things like that. So it's a very, very tailored approach. And having all those folks registered on What's Up Wheat Ridge is a super powerful tool to have just a built-in database. Going forward, with the weather being warmer and pandemic restrictions loosening up, the meetings on demand kind of approach that we did a bit for the first set of neighborhoods, which is basically, you schedule a couple meetings at different times, one in the evening and one on a Saturday, and say, if you can't make it, folks, just let us know. If you want to organize a group, we'll come to you. People were really receptive to that, and we're hopeful that, and our vision before the pandemic started was, these could be informal gatherings of folks that are already gathering, in the evenings on their block, at the local park, in somebody's driveway, and we could just pop in to where you already are and get your input that way. We got some pretty good success that way through virtual meetings in the first go round, but we're hopeful that with the weather, we can beef that up a bit. So, but we're always open to ideas, and we're going to go to the Rice and Equity Task Force and get their ideas, and always open to ideas for how to improve and do better.
I think adding the block champions or the neighborhood champions, I think that's a great idea, because that's going to help kind of build an army. And I think that was part of what the engagement tour was supposed to do, was kind of help build some infrastructure for us to communicate better with the residents in the first place. So if we have some neighborhood champions that can go door to door real quickly and give out 20 flyers or something, so it's not something that's all dependent on staff, I think that's good. So great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson, and then Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for all this information. I just have a question regarding walking and chewing gum at the same time. So we're going to be working on Wadsworth Boulevard, and so then the 38th Avenue streetscape. How would that kind of go together, like as far as, traffic and how that affects, like, Wadsworth already is going to affect neighborhoods, I think. So then you're going to do 38th Streetscape, could be about, well, at the same time, if it comes up. And I'm just wondering how that would kind of work out.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ms. Hutchinson. Certainly, Wadsworth is moving forward on a quick time frame in terms of, about to be out to bid and under construction. We anticipate yet this summer, and we're already thinking, real hard, and I've had some neighborhood engagement about what it's going to look like in terms of local traffic mitigation, in terms of managing those impacts during construction. So we'll definitely continue to be very mindful of that. In terms of 38th Avenue, which there's really, we still need to dive a little deeper, I think, with City Council to understand what your priorities are there. I think there may be priorities both for the eastern portion between, Wadsworth and Sheridan, and also the western portion between Kipling and Youngfield. At least that's my sense. And those are both, pretty major capital construction projects that will, most likely be a little further down the road in terms of identifying funding sources for those. And in the case of the section from Kipling to Youngfield, we haven't even begun any sort of design process, which would be, fairly lengthy and somewhat complicated, just because there's a lot of drainage issues around that. But I think in the shorter term or nearer term, we do have money in the capital budget for the reconstruction of the green in partnership with the school district. And that would be kind of maybe a next logical first phase of streetscape improvements on the eastern portion of 38th Avenue. That would be done in conjunction with that park. And I think that would have relatively minimal impacts on the actual functionality of the street during construction, because it'll mostly be improvements that would be done behind the curb. But definitely we'll need to be mindful of kind of the cumulative impacts of various street reconstruction projects and how those impact traffic on those streets, as well as impact traffic in neighborhoods that surround them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to echo a thanks for all of the hard work. I really appreciate all of the information, and the way it was outlined was very clear and concise. I do want to just comment that I hope the city moves forward with some sort of virtual platform. I think continuing that would allow for more people to participate. I know I prefer to be in person because I'm an extrovert, but at the same time, it allows for convenience to kind of plug in virtually. And so, for any working parents that can kind of tune in and listen while they're at home, I think that would be beneficial for our community. And then I did want to ask Jeff and Ashley if you've had any members of the community reach out and express that they felt like their voices weren't heard, they weren't a part of the process, and how they were brought into the fold, because I have already had people reach out who are disenchanted with the whole process. And I think there's a lot of distrust that's underlying in that realm. And I think people kind of felt like there was just a preconceived outcome. And so they're worried about that. And I just kind of wanted to see how you guys have been addressing that, or how you would address that if more folks come out of the woodworks.
Yeah, I mean, we honestly didn't hear too many people come to us and say, we felt left out, or, didn't get a chance to get involved. We certainly did our best with the early stages of this blitz to make it clear to folks that we're not, this is one of our main talking points, was we're not coming at you with any preconceived ideas of what the issues are. We want this to be as resident driven as possible. And we were kind of repeated that over and over. But I think the reality is when you're, we did a mailer to 5,000 plus households and 600 plus folks. The reality is, certainly we're not going to be able to address everyone's issue, as we all know, of course. But our approach was really more about trying to clarify that it's really open-ended, like we really truly are keeping this open-ended, and making it, a lot of it, both qualitative and quantitative. So giving folks that space to just tell us what's on their mind, and tying data to what people told us, just to have, so it's not subjective in the sense of us reviewing a few pages of comments and saying, oh, that's what their hot button issue is. It's quantified, and that's all kind of put in those reports. But, in terms of the example of the flag lots, for example, and those folks, that's one example where, people may, and that's part of what one of the goals of this program is, to help build trust, so people see that we're listening and it's open-ended, and then we are taking action and being responsive. We're not just sitting on this information. And so I think this is the first round of neighborhoods, and as we get into the next set, hopefully we build that trust a little bit more, so folks see that we genuinely do want to hear from you. But the reality is, I think that we'll always hear from folks that felt like they didn't have a say. I don't know, Ashley, do you have anything else to add on that front?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we're doing to try and help with that is closing the loop after each blitz. So sending out these blitz reports with all of the information to see, this is what your neighbors had to say. Take a look. We got all of this great feedback. We had these many people join us and that kind of information. I think people really like to hear that and be able to read the story of, great, we started with this survey, we narrowed it down to these topics for these reasons, and then, can kind of continue from there. And this last email giving people the Blitz report will not be the last that they hear from us. And I think that's part of building trust as well, checking back in and saying, hey, here's where we are with these different projects that we mentioned that we were taking to council, and here's what we're doing now, and here's what's going to be pushed to later, and it's pushed for these reasons. So really just continuing the communication.
Thank you. Any additional questions from council? Jeff, I had one, and I want to thank you and Ashley for preparing this report. Some great information and great data points, and I think we've got a lot of good direction. One thing that I sort of had a question on, and maybe it's not an issue, but we have 10 neighborhoods, and you've done the first 2, and we've got sort of action plans. And, sort of my metaphor is going to be a juggler. So we've got 2 neighborhoods and 2 balls in the air. We're going to start with 2 more neighborhoods with 2 more balls in the air. So we're going to have more balls in the air. And then the action items that we have on the first neighborhoods are going to add some more complexity to the program. And a year from now, we're going to add 2 more neighborhoods to the program. Do we have sort of a framework that will be able to provide closure to the action items so that residents, the early neighborhoods, will sort of be extending on, but we're adding new work to them, and we'll be able to have the resources to sort of bring closure and not let expectations get far outpace our capacity to address them.
Yeah, that's a fantastic comment, Mr. Mayor. So the short answer is we're working on it in terms of a master. Our thought is to have a sort of a master program, almost dashboard approach that spans all neighborhoods to date in terms of what we're working on, and it gets sort of updated each so you don't have 10 action plans that you're juggling. You have really one action plan that evolves and changes each time you go through each of the neighborhoods and builds off of each other. So we've certainly thought about that and how many balls up in the air we potentially could be creating for ourselves. And our hope, we're not quite there yet in terms of looking at the first 2 neighborhoods and creating that sort of master framework. But our expectation is as we get into these neighborhoods 3 and 4, that we're going to evolve toward that approach where it becomes more concise and more kind of digestible and manageable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't have any more hands up from council. So if I don't see any more questions, I want to thank Jeff and Ashley for bringing this report, and Ken and your team. You've done a great job. We appreciate this, and really look forward to having more discussions and more opportunities to sort of interface with our neighbors. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will go then to our agenda item number 2, and this is a review of the noise ordinance. And Mr. Goff, I will. Ms. Hoppy.
Mr. Mayor, I just wonder if maybe we can take a quick break before we crack this one open. I think it's going to be long.
Okay, 10 minutes, do it. Let's come back at 8 o'clock. We'll see you here. to reconvene our study session for April the 5th, 2021. I believe we've got about everybody back in play, and we're about to have a discussion on agenda item number 2. This is a review of our noise ordinance. And let's see, we have Ms. Nosler back. Ms. Weaver should be joining us momentarily. And Mr. Goff, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to read this item.
We get started?
Please.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't go into too much of the history on the noise ordinance in Wheat Ridge. We've been tinkering with this for quite some time, at least all the way back to 2005, and made some amendments since then. But unfortunately, there's really not a best practice for regulating noise across the country. Every municipality does it a little different. But in about a year and a half ago, September of 2019, we did get direction from City Council to draft a hybrid approach to noise ordinance in Wheat Ridge and enforcement. Hybrid in the sense that for industrial zone properties, there would be a more objective measurement using a decibel reader and set decibel levels, and we've done that. And then the rest of the city would basically be more subjective under a reasonableness standard. However, we did add another layer on with the permit process for outdoor amplified music, which you heard about this evening, or not music, noise, amplified sound, actually, I think is the terminology in the ordinance. And we limited that to 6 permits per location per 12-month period. And we've heard, or at least council members Dozman and Nosler-Beck were contacted, I think, by businesses and residents, and they requested to bring this back to a study session to talk about specifically the permit process. So I'd like to turn it over. Well, first, before I turn it over, we did lay out some proposed recommendations that City Council can consider this evening. Also, before I get into those, we did this time we did a survey, as was mentioned in the citizen comments, and Allie and her team put a survey out using our What's Up Wheat Ridge platform, and maybe I'll let her speak to the survey, but we got quite a few results or responses and some good information from across the city. And then also, as I mentioned, we put together some recommendations that City Council consider, basically doing nothing and leaving the ordinance the way it is, or amending the ordinance to increase the number of allowed outdoor sound events from 6 to some other number. We could amend the ordinance to eliminate the permit process for sound events and either rely on a reasonableness standard or set a maximum decibel level in those zone districts. And I think we have one more. Or another option is to look at a special use permit process and either require a special use permits process or permit for a business for any number of outdoor sound events in a 12-month period, or for a certain number above maybe a floor. Say a business can have 6 a year. If they want to have more than 6, they have to go through a special use process. And a special use permit is unique because it provides more discretion for City Council to put specific requirements in place based on the location of the business and maybe what neighborhood it's adjacent to. So there's some flexibility there that council may have to regulate these differently depending on where they are located in the city. So we can talk through those individually, but Allie, did you want to talk about the survey real quick on your how you put that survey out?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Goff. as we sort of detailed in the staff report, we were thrilled with the response. We got 199 responses to our survey through What's Up Wheat Ridge. We did this quite quickly because I know that council members Dozman and Nosselbeck wanted to have this conversation sooner rather than later. So we wanted to do our best to just get a little bit more feedback from the community. The speaker who called earlier and mentioned that, you know, this is not, the responses were not validated is 100% correct. This is not a statistically valid survey. You're all familiar with what that is through our resident survey process. That this is not that. This was an opportunity to gauge, again, community sentiment with the idea to bring forward to you all just a bit more information and give some, you know, others in the community a chance to weigh in. I will say though, that the tool that we're using, that What's Up Wheat Ridge, is really powerful in that the Let's Talk project, the Improve WADS project, the other projects we have going on allow people to register. And then what we can do is we can email out through the system back to those registrants. And so the biggest response group that we got were, we sent an email through What's Up Wheat Ridge to already registered participants, mostly the Let's Talk participants actually. And that's what yielded the highest response. So I feel pretty good. Like, yes, there might be some folks in here that claim to be a resident and aren't, or claim to be a business owner and aren't, but I have to say that email alone generated 81 responses, and those are folks that have already subscribed to projects and participated. So while it's not statistically valid, I hope you feel that there's some good information here about, you know, perhaps what some neighbors generally feel in Wheat Ridge. So we promoted it quite broadly through our usual channels. Mayor's Matters, our website. We do have a email subscription feature happening in Wheat Ridge that yielded some good responses. Social media is never, we always share, of course. We use all the tools in our tool belt. And then What's Up Wheat Ridge was again, one of the most successful. I'm obviously here and happy to answer any questions you have about the survey, but you've all got the data in front of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Allie. Mr. Mayor, I think we could turn it over to Council Members Dozman and Nosselbeck if you'd like.
Okay.
Bring this to the study session this evening to see if they have any introductory remarks.
Terrific. Ms. Dozman and Ms. Nosselbeck, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll go ahead and just speak first. We have obviously been trying to address a noise ordinance since before I was on council. It was one of the very first topics that we discussed after I was seated. We had been having this issue, this ongoing issue for many years now, probably the better part of a decade at this point. And I think with a lot of things, you know, we understood that progress didn't necessarily mean perfection. And we wanted to move forward with something that we thought was amenable to the community. We had to take into consideration many stakeholders, residents, businesses, and consumers within our community. And I think I have a couple questions for staff that I'll address, but really we had some residents and one business in particular reach out, and then I did a little bit of discussing this issue with other businesses that have amplified sound events, and got some feedback from business owners that use this method and for, you know, to seek revenue within our community and also kind of stake a name for themselves. So we wanted to bring it forward just to open up the issue for a little more discussion and kind of see where council members are at and revisit and see if we got it right the first time or if there might need to be some revisions made.
Thank you, Ms. Nosselbeck.
Thanks. And just to piggyback on what Leah said, when we first passed this noise ordinance, it was newer on council, and now since we've passed the ordinance, have a lot more information since we've passed that original noise ordinance, where I've heard from a lot more residents putting the noise ordinance out there and seeing how it's impacted businesses. how it's impacted residents, both positively and negatively. You know, we, at least I can speak for both Leah and myself, because we've been hearing from a lot of constituents about this, that it just seemed really necessary for us to bring this back. And even when we passed this originally, we said that we were most likely going to come back and revisit and see how things were going. And so this is just us doing that. A couple of things that I'm really hopeful we can address in addition to the permitting this evening is looking at how we rolled out the initial noise ordinance, and if there's a possibility for us to re-engage and re-roll out the noise ordinance with our business owners and our residents, and also, you know, work with Chief Murtha to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to what the ordinance does. There seemed to be a lot of confusion in the initial rollout, and so that's one of the things that I hope we can address tonight. And then also, if we can, this has been really one of the toughest parts of the whole conversation, but is getting down to how we, outside of the industrial businesses, how we measure and what we consider reasonable and unreasonable, and just have that conversation to decide if we want to measure that or if we just want to go with the permitting process. But I just think it's important for us to talk about that. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of those things that I hope we can discuss tonight too. Thanks to everybody also that came and spoke and gave public comment at the earlier part of the meeting tonight.
Thank you. I had a comment at hand from Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So for me tonight, the goal would be for us to have some sort of direction on where we're going with the permit process. I would prefer that we don't touch the industrial zoning. And also the study sessions that we had in the past, in those informational packets, there was information about what our communities around us do and how they're doing it, and a lot more information about that than what we have in this packet tonight. And I think that's because the direction was that we were going to be looking at the permit process for the amplified sound events. So if we're going to go and dig into the entire thing again, then I'd like to say time out. We don't have all of the information sitting in front of us, and I'm unwilling to have that conversation until everybody has done that research and that study piece. I am, however, willing to have the conversation with the special use permit process because that's the information that we have laid out in front of us tonight. So I just kind of want to put that out there, that if that's what we want to talk about, that piece, then I think we have all the information we need for that. If we're going to dig into other pieces, then I think that we need the other pieces of information for it.
Thank you. Ms. Dozeman?
Thank you. Yeah, so I would agree that the main points that we wanted to address tonight are the permit process and the notification process. And so I guess if you don't mind, I would like to jump in with my first question as far as Patrick and staff goes. Can you give us a little bit of background as to like how we fell on the number 6 per year? Can you just explain? Because I know that Councilmember Urban and I had both expressed some concerns about that low of a number per year, and we kind of just passed it to get it passed. So can you just kind of tell us how you came to that number, or staff came to that number?
I think it came through conversation with City Council at one of the previous study sessions. I don't remember. We may have threw out a number, but I'm sorry, I don't remember. I was going to pull up my notes from 2019 to see if I could see what conversation was had, but I think it was a discussion between council that why we landed on 6. and I don't know why.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think, Leah, I'm pretty sure that that came out of a consensus, if I remember correctly, but I think it was one of those types of consensuses where it was like, it started big and it started small and it went back and forth, and then 6 got the majority of the consensus, and then it went into the vote. But one question that I did want to ask though is, can we please have more explanation about the special use permit? So in the packet, there's the list, and I've been a part of conversations where we have approved special use permits, so I'm pretty clear about how they operate. But I would say that the kind of the little diagram that we got doesn't really give you is the amount of information that we actually end up looking at when we do a special use permit process. So can we maybe just get a deeper dive into the special use permit process, please?
Yeah, like I said, Mr. Johnstone is back on screen, so I think he's ready to speak to that. Thanks, Ken.
Of course. Yeah, the special use permit process, I mean, I guess maybe if I can have some time, I might just give a kind of a quick outline of what that looks like. It, starts like all land use application processes with, a conversation at staff level, a pre-application meeting. It does trigger a neighborhood meeting. So there's notice to the neighborhood that, there's the potential for an application to be submitted. So there's probably pros and cons to that, but I think on balance pros that, the neighborhood would get notified that, there's a potential for, however we define this, right? That there's a potential for a special use for whatever we're calling this. There's a lot more work to be done as to what exactly that would be, but it engages the neighborhood with the business owner that's proposing the operation. And I think another one of the, and there's then a series of criteria that have to be met. So, writ large, I think special uses are uses that may or may not be appropriate in a given zoning district in a given contextual location. And the special use permit process and the criteria for review are really intended to kind of look at the nuances of how appropriate it is in that particular location. The other, I think advantage potentially, and I'm not lobbying for this necessarily, but is that you can conditionally approve a special use permit. You can conditionally approve it in terms of specific operational components, which might be important when it comes to this topic, such as hours of operation or days of week. I mean, it could be that outdoor amplified music is, perfectly appropriate in certain locations and maybe conditionally appropriate in other locations because it's a location that's more embedded or adjacent to a neighborhood, as opposed to perhaps something that's, on a major commercial corridor, not really proximate to residential locations where noise would become an issue. So there's the ability to kind of approve it conditionally and also it can be conditional to the operator, right? So it wouldn't necessarily run with the land, so that you'd be having kind of an operational discussion with the particular business owner to align kind of the conditions of approval with what their, perfect business model is and what we think, some reasonable restrictions potentially on that business model are to make it fit in with the location in question. Procedurally, after you start the process with those first steps with staff, and I would just note that, I mean, depending on how you'd frame this, I mean, some of those conversations at a staff level, would I wouldn't want to say discourage, but could certainly throw some cautionary flags out there from the get-go if we think it's a tricky or a dicey location to permit amplified sound in a more permissive way. Ultimately, they can be approved administratively. by the Community Development Director, my position. And there's a few different triggers for when they would come to City Council for review. They don't trigger a Planning Commission review, but they can trigger a City Council review. Generally, those are, I think.
And we're losing some of your sound.
You are?
I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but yes, you're kind of cutting in and out.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my video. Sometimes that helps.
Okay.
Shoot. How's my sound now?
Better.
Okay, great. So generally, again, they can be approved administratively if an applicant objects to a recommended condition of approval that I might impose on that approval. They can request a City Council hearing. And if there are formal objections to the application from the neighborhood noticing process, that too would trigger a City Council review. So on some of these, let's say, more contentious locations, just be advised that it would likely require a public hearing before City Council. So that, in a nutshell, and I don't have I don't know that we need to dive into the criteria specifically, but essentially the criteria are designed to address neighborhood compatibility in terms of potential nuisance types of impacts, which is why I think we've thrown it out there amongst the range of possible considerations in terms of a regulatory approach on these types of operations.
Okay, your sound quality is still diminishing, but thank you for that answer. And Ms. Hoppy has a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that, Ken. I'm going to use an example of a business that we have that has a special use permit, and one of them is they're the Subaru pros, and part of it was because a piece of their business wasn't necessarily allowed in their zoning. So it went through a special permit process for it to be able to do that one particular piece of their business. So it's like 90% of their business they could do, but there was one thing that they couldn't do. So that's something that went through like a process, and the special use permit process. And when we looked at it, you look at the surrounding community, you hear what the community members have to say about it, and then you approve or deny the special use permit. Because it's a special use permit, it's not a use by right. Therefore, it would then be, if it did come to council, then it would be up to council. It wouldn't be something like we were saying, you have a use by right, and so you can't have that use. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there too. One reason why I'm asked, oh, sorry, Ken, did I get that wrong?
No, you did. You got it absolutely right. I was just going to state that it's definitely a discretionary approval at council's discretion.
And one reason why I am so interested in this option 4B is because a conversation that I had with Councilwoman Hulteen brought forward, in my mind, an issue that we would end up running into later on down the road, which was once Clear Creek Crossing is built out and we have, that whole entertainment area, and we have, let's say, a wine bar that has, live music on the weekends. Would that be a more appropriate place for somewhere to have more than 6 permits than somewhere that's maybe embedded in a neighborhood? And the answer to that is yes. Well, we're trying very hard to figure out a process that works for our community as a whole. This is not about one, it should not and cannot be about one block and one bar. It cannot be. We have 30,000 plus people in our community and many small businesses. And we need to make sure that we're doing what we can that works effectively for all of them, which is why I think it's been so hard to nail down this noise ordinance. And so, so for me, I personally feel like the 4B is probably our best path forward. And I appreciate Councilwoman Halteen giving me that perspective of, you know, we have communities that aren't even built yet that we need to try to keep in mind while we're building these regulations. So that's all I have for now.
Additional comments? Ms. Hutchinson.
Got it. Thank you, Mayor. You know, I'm just thinking, you know, we voted on this and we voted on it 8-0. Okay. I would like to know the difference between special permit and a regular permit. And also, what is the definition of a dicey location? Like a special permit would be in. Because to have, we made a decision, this is getting more complicated just like it was before, and we're making decisions right now about things that aren't even built yet, and we don't even know what is going to be there. I mean, we're not clairvoyant. So right now we do have an issue about noise, and we're trying to, I thought we were trying to handle it. I don't want to see us just keep pushing it down the road. You know, we voted on it, and residents do have a right to have, you know, a quiet neighborhood. And it's not just one neighborhood. We have quite a few bars that are on 38th Avenue right now. So it's not just one neighborhood, but people do have a right to have a quiet neighborhood. And if it interferes with them, I mean, I think it's an issue. We voted on 6 permits and now we want to change it. So I'd like to know the difference. Okay, 6 permits versus special permit, but maybe what's in a dicey neighborhood or a location. I don't know what that means.
I can attempt to address some of your questions, Ms. Hutchison. Well, the permit process that's in place now in ordinance that you did approve, City Council approved, that's a blanket permit process for any entity that wants to have outdoor amplified sound event. As Ken just explained, Mr. Johnson explained, an SUP, special use permit process, would make that more specific to the location of that restaurant or bar, and could be specific to that business. It wouldn't apply to a business. You could have an SUP that has certain restrictions in it for a restaurant on 44th Avenue, and you could have a separate SUP for a bar restaurant on 29th Avenue, and they could have different restrictions, different, as Ken mentioned, different time limits, different decibel levels, different number of permits. So that's the difference between those. I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say dicey neighborhood or business. Are you saying dicey?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that something?
Because that was brought up, and that's why I didn't know what that meant. But a special permit, though, you're just stating like it's for a restaurant or a bar or something like that. Well, what if somebody in their neighborhood wants to have a special permit, like for the whole block or something like that? I mean, is that something that people can do, or is it just a business?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's any private, I guess we have to look at the definition of that in our current ordinance. And, you know, when we first adopted this, we did talk about neighborhoods having block parties. And if they wanted outdoor amplified music, they would have to get a permit. So it's not necessarily just a business. I keep using the term business because that's what we're dealing with primarily at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I have Ms. Hulteen and then Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. to kind of follow up on Miss Hoppy's point, well, a couple of points. I'm with her. I like the 4B option. We did come to a consensus about 6 seemed like a reasonable permit number for the average business who occasionally has live music as part of their business model. But we do have some businesses in our community that exist now. And we certainly are looking at, having tools in our toolbox to attract, diversity of new businesses in areas that we're significantly investing in, to attract new residents and businesses who might want to have more music. And I think what I really learned, I think many of us who've been on council, like this was our first issue, whether it was a year and a half ago or earlier, is that it's really specific to the neighborhood and the location and the impact it has on those local businesses. Ricoli's is in my district and they're on Wadsworth. And if they had loud music, you may not even be able to hear it on the patio because they're on Wadsworth. But, there are businesses that we have in our community that could actually have the capacity to have live music more frequently and not impact the neighborhoods at all. The special use permit to me really allows that conversation. So if there's a neighborhood like we've been hearing from off of 44th and Iris or other neighborhoods, it would take the conversation to the neighborhood level. And that granular decision making to me best serves our communities. So I strongly support 4B, keeping it at 6 as it stands now. And if a business has a model that wants to expand beyond that, then it becomes a more tactical conversation that is with the neighbors and ultimately, could end up in council. But I definitely support that approach because I think it allows us to be more point specific. To Ms. Hutchinson's question, the one comment I did have about that was I don't think we can really extend that into the neighborhoods. That, to me, this feels like it's exclusive to commercial and mixed use zone districts, which would create a little distinction. And if we did that, I would think we would reduce the residential permits down. I think if everyone had neighbors that was doing 6 permits a year, we might find we're not as mad at our commercial corridors and maybe wanting to move out of our neighborhoods. So that would be my recommendation to consider, would be reducing residential permits to 2. I can't imagine anyone in a residence needing more than 2 a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, let me think. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. But when it comes to the actual permit, does it run with the land or does it run with the applicant? And what is the ability to revoke that special use permit in this particular case?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can be granted to run with the land or not to run with the land. So in other words, if we felt like it should be specific to the applicant and their business model, and the specific, limitations that might be imposed upon that through the SUP process, then it would often be limited to not run with the land. The other thing with SUPs that may be of some interest is that they can be called up by City Council, and I'd have to read the code, but I think that's regardless of whether City Council was the approving body or was administratively approved. But City Council has the authority to call up an SUP if you believe it's in violation of their granted approvals.
Okay, thank you. And that was my main concern. And go ahead, sorry.
You'd asked about revocation as well, and yes, SUPs can be revoked upon call up, or typically we probably also put some standard language as a standard condition in the SUP that it can be revoked for violation of the terms and conditions of the permit. So that's a tool that's always available.
And it's maybe a bit of a maybe a bit of a nuance, but just to throw it out there while we are having this discussion, is that in mixed use districts, there is not an SUP process. There's a conditional use permit process for certain uses, which has some parallels to the SUP process, but is also very different. Very different in the fact that it does not have the it is entirely administratively approved, and it doesn't have the city council call up provision, which isn't to say that you couldn't amend the mixed use code to incorporate an SUP process, but it's not currently constructed to have an SUP. It's only constructed to have what are called conditional use permits.
I guess that was my last question, is relating to that, is that as we begin to define what this is, whether it's an outdoor music venue or some other sort of outdoor amusement, in what cases do we need to start defining that particular use in code as opposed to developing a special use permit?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we need to further that discussion. I mean, as I think Mr. Urban, you asked the question earlier today, that you know, our interpretation of the zoning code has been that, you know, there's various types of commercial businesses that might have cause to have an outdoor amplified sound event, and it's been our interpretation that that's implicitly an accessory use to the underlying permitted use. So most typically a restaurant or a bar, you know, it's been our interpretation that that having outdoor music is an accessory to that and therefore is allowed. But we would need to if we were gonna make this a special use or conditional use or whatever the direction of council would be, we need to, you know, call out what that is in the use chart so that we know when that process is triggered.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a Mr. Stites on my list next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, and I think I'm leaning towards the 4B with the special use permits as well, just because it gives us a little bit more of a scalpel approach. But I know, like, Rocky Mountain Bottling Company is spending a lot of money to build a very large sound wall. Is there a possibility to require some of these outdoor restaurants or some of these outdoor venues to require some sort of sound deadening, as far as they have companies apparently that do this before they can get a special use permit to spend some money on deadening the sound so it's not just going directly into the neighborhoods?
I think you can pretty much ask for anything in a special use permit process. If that's, yeah, it might be hard to kind of enforce, I guess, what kind of sound deflection is going to work for that restaurant or bar and for that neighborhood. But yeah, I think it's something. I don't think I'm wrong with that, am I?
You're not wrong, Patrick. I think more on a more basic level, I think, you know, one of the tools you might, you know, discuss as part of, you know, reviewing a location for, you know, outdoor live music would be, as a starting point, just the location on the site, right? So if the site does abut or is proximate to residential, but also is adjacent to a major street, you might encourage that the location of the music venue portion of the site be, you know, erring on the commercial side of the property versus the residential. And, you know, you could certainly look at other more passive techniques such as landscaping in terms of creating buffers, but it would, you know, all be fairly nuanced based on the specifics of the site.
How many, and this might have been in the packet, I missed it, how many permits have actually been applied for since we put this in?
2 different businesses have applied for a total of 6 permits, and several of those permits were either relinquished or moved to a different date because of the weather. particularly around St. Patrick's Day this year. So there have been a relatively short list of both applicants and permits under the ASCP program.
So, and they were given 6 for the calendar year of 2020, or 6, or just however many remaining?
We have interpreted the ordinance to mean 12 in any consecutive rolling 12-month period. So it's not 6 in 2021, it's 6 in any rolling 12-month period.
So we're revisiting the ordinance, but people haven't even applied for their own amount of permits yet?
No.
Okay.
Let's see, I have Ms. Hulteen and then Ms. Hoppy, and I have a question down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to backtrack a little bit on my comments. I feel like, I mentioned we reduced the number in the residential neighborhoods, and that sounded good to me. But I'm actually even just thinking about, I have a neighbor around the corner with several kids, and they historically get a bouncy castle and have some live music or something for kids' birthday parties. So I guess I'm going to rescind that comment and try and keep it clean and just focus on the commercial right now. And if at some point we find we have issues in how this is playing out in the residential, we can readdress it then. But it takes communication every time we change this. And I'm okay if we just focus on how this looks in the residential or in the commercial. And then a question, and Ken, I think you sort of answered this, but I want to just put it on the table anyway. Could we be looking at, like, special permit is a little bit of a hybrid of what we're seeing in some of these other recommendations, and that, yes, you can have your permit, but like you can't be allowed, you can't play past, 8 o'clock on weeknights and 10, like have time parameters and decibel parameters around that as well.
Yeah, that's certainly an option. I think the one thing we'd want to be, I think, just considerate of is from an enforcement standpoint, and I'll maybe speak on behalf of the chief at my own peril, but it becomes difficult to enforce when you got a different set of rules for each site as it pertains to the live music. So I to the extent that things like that are quantifiable, like hours, like decibel limits, to the extent that you can keep them consistent and quantified at a citywide level, and then work on the edges, the margins, the nuances on a site level, that would probably be advantageous from an enforcement standpoint.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask, there are a few other kind of cleanup items, and so I just kind of want to put out there and see how the council feels about it. One of the things in the current ordinance is that you have to notify within 300 foot radius of your business that you're going to have an event coming up. And I think that while the intention was good, I think that that if we could get rid of that, then that would also help the business owners, try to get rid of kind of this extra regulation. Another thing that came up is the calendar year versus the ongoing 12-month rolling period. I did have a business owner that has amplified sound events ask me if there would be any way we could put that into a calendar year instead of a rolling 12-month, because it'd be easier for this person to it's easier to be able to plan, like at the beginning of your year, you can plan out what all of your events are going to be throughout the calendar. And then there were 5 requests from the police department in our memo, changing the definition of unreasonable noise, adding a new definition of unavoidable noise, striking some words, and adding some language about being able to cancel, revoke, suspend business licenses. So those are all in the packet. And so I was just wondering, kind of, where does everybody feel about those recommendations and requests.
Thank you. Ken, I had a question for you. In the ordinance, when I look at it, as you know, I run a restaurant and we have a patio and we put music on the patio that's amplified music. And I don't consider it an event, a sound event, but I do consider that the ordinance would sort of cover that type of sound in a commercial, in a commercial setting. Can you speak to that? And then because also use different terms like live event or live music event or things like that. And I know that we're talking about different types of sound or events or things like that, but I don't know, do you believe that the ordinance addresses the differences in those types of uses?
And maybe I can address that. I don't know, Ken wasn't probably involved in the drafting of that, but it's the current ordinance defines amplified sound, Mayor, and it is specific to the operation of any loudspeaker, public address system, or other sound amplifying equipment for the purpose of giving instructions, directions, talks, addresses, or lectures, or for transmitting music or sound to any persons or assemblages of persons. So it would
pretty widespread.
It is. So it would cover your restaurant, Bud, and I mean, as we talked, and even with some of the neighbors of the T-Birds understood that a restaurant like yours might be different than T-Birds, and the music may not be the same. So I think they understood that every location's a little bit different, and it was hard to draft an ordinance under this hybrid approach and permit process approach to address those differences. And that's one reason we've suggested this SUP process, because that could provide you with different level of outdoor events than somewhere else.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I distinctly remember having a conversation about allowing music from like jukeboxes and stuff like that. So did that not, as I understood it, if you have a jukebox, then, and you have, your speakers that run throughout your sound system that runs throughout your property, that is allowed. It was the live events that weren't allowed. So is that not how it ended up in the?
No, it's not live events. It's any amplified music that's outside. So if it's a jukebox that just projects the speakers are inside, this ordinance does not cover that. It's outdoor amplified sound.
So,
Mr. Dahl, do you have a clarification on that also?
Yeah, the definition that Patrick references ends though with an additional sentence that says these amplified sound doesn't include sound that's not audible 50 feet from the property line. So, and I think that's relevant to the circumstance where you have a patio or something and you do have music playing over the speaker, but it's not a band. And if it's not audible 50 feet from the property line, it by definition isn't an amplified sound, and therefore you don't need a permit for it.
Yeah, thank you, Dahl.
Okay, thank
you. Ms. Weaver.
So I want to understand. So if the music is amplified, like through a sound system, which is what Councilor Hoppy just said, but what if it's that band, but you can't hear it 50 feet from the property? Is that what I understand?
Yeah, I think if it's amplified, you're gonna hear it.
You're probably gonna hear it. Yeah. Okay. And so when we're talking about 4B, and I just want to understand that we're talking about both things of one can apply for these up to 6 events, or they can apply for this SUP.
We gave you an option there.
One or the other, sorry.
Yeah, we gave you an option with the SUP process that You maybe, if you're going to have less than 6 or less sound events a year, you don't have to get an SUP. But, and you guys could determine what that number is. Or you could say, and then anybody else, if you want 7 or more events a year, you need an SUP or permit. Yeah, or you could require everybody that wants outdoor sound events to get an SUP.
Okay, and so anybody can apply, or they have to be in a commercial zone? Is that what we're deciding on, that one has to be in a commercial zone?
No, I mean, these are things that you get to decide. You know, you can, there's no rule to begin with. You're fashioning the rule. And so you have this permit SUP process available. Mm-hmm. So your challenge, if you choose to use the SUP process, is to say, okay, we're going to use it. Now let's say where and how.
Right.
We're going to use it for all permits. We're going to use it for 7 and up and keep the existing system we have for up to 6. We're going to say that it's applicable only in commercial districts.
Okay.
You know, what you're going to need to do is start with, do you want to have an additional system in addition to what is presently on the books? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think you take up individual components of it. Otherwise, you'll never get a decision made. You kind of knock off one at a time, and then you'll have the outcome.
Ms. Weaver, today's ordinance, as that's written, it's permit for amplified sound event could be anywhere in the city. It doesn't matter what.
Okay. Okay. And of course, I'm also thinking about where I live as well, you know, in that I do event type things that often have amplified sound, just like.
We lost you, Amanda.
Yeah, Ms. Weaver, I don't hear you.
How going to not individually sort of hurt or help these individual businesses. Are you guys still hearing me?
We heard the last.
Okay. It looks like my internet was kind of going in and out. This is a half-baked idea, but I think a lot, as I'm sure the mayor does, about the actual facility that I am using and where the music is being played and how it amplifies throughout a neighborhood and who's going to be affected. And I have been through this special permit process because of the nature of the business I have. This permit process is not difficult at all, by the way. It is the city's, it's a very straightforward process, and I've been through it many times when there have been events at the farm. So I do want to let people know that it's a really reasonable process, I think, that the city has. I do think we should consider facility a bit. I know that there's a particular bar that we've been discussing, and it has particularly bad infrastructure for amplifying sound throughout a neighborhood. And I like that place, and I like listening to music there, but I also can understand how that particular place, the infrastructure that has been built, in that it's highly concrete, it has no sound barrier, and that music will amplify into the neighborhoods. And so I'm just wondering in all of this if there is some onus that the owner of the business needs to have on considering how that music does amplify, because you're right, each one of these businesses has different kinds of music. And while I'm probably not going to have a rock band at the farm, you'd be able to hear it all the way throughout Wheat Ridge if it were at particular points on the farm. So maybe facility is something to consider as well. I don't know. Sorry, thanks for my meanderings there, or tolerating them.
Ms. Hoppy?
I'm going to try to start to chip away at this rock. And I'm going to start by asking if we have a consensus to amend the ordinance to require a special use permit process for businesses that want to hold outdoor sound events and require the special use permit for blank, I'm not saying a number yet, blank or more outdoor sound events in a 12-month period. So do we want to move forward with the special use process? That's my consensus. Do we want to do that?
Okay, I'm gonna have.
I would like to support that, but it really depends on how many that number is for me, Ms. Hoppy.
Okay, well, I was gonna, okay, I'll put a number in and we'll see how it goes. Require a special use process for 8 or more outdoor sound events in a 12-month period.
I have a question, Ms. Hoppy. So I feel like we're kind of playing Price is Right a little bit here with like highest and lowest. So instead of, I would like to suggest instead of a consensus on that number, if we could have just a short focused conversation on that, because some people might be sitting here hoping the next number is 6 or the next number is 10. That's just how I'm feeling. So I don't know if other people are sharing that, but I mean, I think we're really close between 6, 8, 10, but I might be hesitant to say 8 if what I really want is 6, and I don't know if we're going towards 10 or what have you. So
here, I guess I'll start and I'll say I am comfortable with up to 8, not more than 8.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hoppy, basically as a use by right, so any establishment can have up to 8 without doing anything.
8, and then you have to go to a special use permit process.
Just to clarify, we would be ditching the regular permit process completely at that point then?
Yes.
Yes. No, you have to have that regular permit process up to the 8, right?
Oh.
Because then that's how you know if someone's having more than. So I would love to hear if anybody else has any other numbers that they would like to put out there, or if they support 8.
Ms. Hutchinson, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I need some clarification.
Okay. That's
So
good.
exactly how many permits we're not talking about the 6 regular ones anymore. We're going to special use permits, and now it's 8 or what?
It would be the way it's written. It would be the regular permits up to 8. If your business wants to have more than 8 or up to, we're trying to come up with a number. So that's why I would really like people to raise their hand and say a number rather than just keep shaking your head no at the number I'm giving. But up to a certain number, and then if you want more than that, you have to get the special use permit.
Well, so this is for a consensus, and it looks like we have two hands.
Oh, no.
Okay. Are these questions, Ms. Noslerbeck?
Sorry, I wasn't shaking my hand at my head at the number. I was just trying to ask a question, and so I think it would be really helpful if we could just have like Patrick or whoever can best explain the difference between the 2 permits. Just explain like what a special use permit is and what the other permit is as well, just because we have a lot of people tuned in tonight, like trying to understand what this is. And I would like the clarity too, just what's the difference between the permits that already exist, the 6, and then a special use permit.
Okay, well, again, today the permit process is a permit process for any entity that would like to have outdoor amplified sound. They can apply for a permit through the city clerk's office, and they have up to 6 in a 12-month period. A special use process is what Ken Johnstone explained earlier, could be specific to a specific location. And it's either approved administratively through Ken, or it could come to city council for approval. It requires a neighborhood meeting. And it goes through that process that's in your packet, that attachment, that last attachment. There's a pre-application meeting, there's a neighborhood meeting, SUP, process or permit is drafted that includes specific location, what they can and cannot do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and my one follow-up question to that is just that for businesses, do they either go down the 6 permit process or the special use permit process, or can they utilize both options?
Well, based on Ms. Hoppy's current consensus on the table, she's suggesting that if a business wants to have 8 or less in the 12-month period, they go through the permit process that we have in place today. If they want to have more than 8 in a 12-month process, they have to go through an SUP process, which requires the neighborhood meeting and potentially come into city council for approval.
Okay, so they would have 8 just of our regular permit, our noise ordinance permits. And then if they wanted to have any additional events beyond that 8, they would have to go through the special use permit process.
That's what Ms. Hoppy is suggesting.
Okay, thank you so much for letting us just kind of walk it through. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy, Ms. Hutchinson?
Thank you, Mayor. Why not leave it at 6 permits, and if they want to go beyond that, then do special use?
You could, that's an option. Ms. Hoppy suggested 8, but if you want to make that consensus, that's an option also.
I do.
Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Noslerback?
And also, I did really like Councilmember Hoppy's suggestion of the calendar year, but are we not addressing that portion of the? Okay, I won't go there yet.
Not yet. I'm trying to just chip away one thing at a time to decide if we even want to go with the special use permit process. So what I originally wanted to do is to see if we actually want to go down the road of the special use permit process. And then it was suggested that maybe I put a number in there. So I put a number in there. And then it was suggested that maybe everybody just kind of tells us what number they want so that we're not playing Price is Right. So then I asked everybody to tell us what number they wanted so we weren't playing Price is Right. But I'm going to try to just go for this. And if you don't like this number, don't put your hand up and I'll ask for a different number and we'll just go that way. So I would like to ask that if you want to have more than 8 amplified sound events, that you have to apply for the special use permit process.
And to be clear, Ms. Hoppy, and up to 8, they still have to apply for the permits that we have today.
Up to 8, you still have to utilize the permit process that we have currently. So I'm asking for a consensus for that. And if you don't like the number, don't put your hand up and I'll see what I can find out there.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I count 6 hands, so that's some strength in that position.
The next thing that I would like to ask for consensus is that we end the 300-foot notification requirement.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
This is the requirement that the restaurant has to send flyers out to every household within 300 feet of them if they're having an event.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 votes for that consensus.
I have a question. Will they still have to notify with the sign though, as regular special use permits require?
Well, I believe we're talking about not the special use, but the initial.
Or excuse me, so when I have done events at the farm, there is a sign that goes up that announces that I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I have not sent out flyers because I'm required to put a sign up. So is this instead of the sign, or is this
because you're getting is it because you're getting a temporary liquor permit?
Probably, yeah, that usually goes with.
Yeah, these guys already have their liquor licenses, so they don't have to put up the temporary liquor permit sign.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
that. Okay, I would like to ask for a consensus that we change it from a rolling 12 months to a calendar year. Starts in January, ends in December.
Seven, looks like we have 8 votes for that.
I would like to ask for a consensus regarding the recommendations from our police department in the amendments to the noise ordinance for clarity or to increase the objectivity for enforcement of officers in the field. The first request was change the definition of unreasonable noise. Should I read the whole thing or we're good? So change the definition of unreasonable noise as requested by the police department. Can I have consensus for that?
We have 8 votes for that.
I would like to ask for a consensus for clarity or to increase the objectivity of enforcement for our officers in the field to add a new definition of unavoidable noise.
Unavoidable noise. 8 votes for that.
I would like to ask for consensus to amend section 16-103. Mr. Dahl, will we still need this section 16-103 if we change to sorry, let me check that. We might not even need that consensus. Let me check.
You'll still need the entire section, but you'll still need the section. You're just taking out that prima facie kind of silly standard.
Will this still be measured at the source of the sound and not the property line?
Yeah, if you just take out those 2 words, the remaining structure of that section remains. So it's just kind of changing the legal standard a little, and that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. I'd like to ask for consensus to amend 16-103B to strike the words prima facie as prima facie from the ordinance.
It's like we have consensus on that.
I'd like to ask for consensus to amend section 16-103D to read, no person shall conduct an amplified sound event in a manner which exceeds the levels specified in section 16-103B without first obtaining a permit to do so. An outdoor amplified sound event on private property is permitted under the section under the following conditions. So it erased all the words of shall use or cause to be used any loudspeaker, sound system amplified, and added, so it erased all of those words and it added conduct an amplified sound event.
Ms. Hoppy, the purpose of this amendment is just for clarity. There was some confusion if this was considering indoor or outdoor sound event. The way the language was written, it made it sound like we were talking about indoor music too. So that's why we drafted that differently.
So I'd like to ask for consensus for that change.
So it looks like we have consensus for that that one.
So the next one I feel like actually needs some discussion, and it's adding the following language to the ordinance, which is the city may cancel, revoke, suspend, or similarly suspend the business license of any business which permits noise in violation of this section pursuant to the procedures in code sections 11-30 through 1132. Mr. Goff, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, we're suggesting to add that, and maybe the chief and Jerry can also speak to this, but just provides us another tool of enforcement if a business isn't complying with this ordinance. And we've had that issue in many other different areas of the city, and we found it's most successful to be able to use that as an enforcement tool to take away their business license if they're refusing to comply. That usually gets them to the table fairly quickly if they don't want to lose their business license.
Yeah, it's a strong tool. We have that in place for the massage regulation, as you well know, and that's suggested, I think, also for the tobacco retail licensing scheme that you're seeing. I think you've seen it on first reading. You'll see it on second reading. It's a tool that's available to you, and it really is a very direct tool, as Patrick mentions.
Further discussion on that, Ms. Hulteen?
Perfect question. You know, we're talking about multiple instances here, but what is, when something like this gets passed, what is our communication strategy to let businesses know about this? I mean, by the time you've violated this 9 times, like hopefully you'd be aware of it, but I just want to make sure that we've got businesses that are in the know if this is a tool we're using.
If I might answer two things. At a first level, obviously, it would seem to me if the city changes the noise ordinance in the way you're discussing, the revision, once it's gone through first reading, second reading, public hearing, of course, then the final version, if it gets adopted, I would expect that would be shared with commercial businesses primarily to say, please be advised, use this ordinance. And Patrick or Allie may want to speak to how that would get broadcast. On an individual business basis for a violation, there is a process, as it says in Code 1130 through 32, is the business licensing chapter. And if there's going to be a consideration of revocation or suspension of a business license, the business licensee gets a specific notice delivered to that licensee and an opportunity for hearing in front of the city treasurer. The treasurer can appoint an administrative hearing officer. So, because that's very important, you don't take a license away without them knowing that they have an opportunity for hearing, show up at the hearing, and go through that whole process. So those are the 2 ways that you would know generally and specifically in connection with an individual business.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be in support of making sure that city staff has the power to revoke their business license in the situation. And, just overall on this particular issue, I think what's frustrating is that we don't really have a whole lot of data or a track record on this ordinance as it relates to whether it's working or not working. And so that's sort of frustrating to me as we go through this. Should we do this or should we do that? Because we just really don't have the background data to tell us what's working and what's not. But I would agree that as we talk about, what tools the city has, the ability to revoke a business license, I think is crucial. So I'd be in support of that.
I'd like to ask for a consensus that we add the following language to the ordinance. The city may cancel, revoke, suspend, or similarly suspend the business license of any business which permits noise in violation of this section pursuant to the procedures in code section 11-30 through 11-32.
Looks like we have consensus for that.
And then I would just like to ask staff, what is the plan for the new rollout process? And is the making the new, when we make the new ordinance active, will we be able to have the rollout process in place?
Yeah, we'll look at, we don't have this scheduled yet. So for first or second reading. So if you want to do this immediately, we can get it scheduled as soon as possible. If you want to give us time so that we have time to roll out, in addition to what Mr. Dahl mentioned about notifying businesses, we have our connections newsletter that goes out to every business, every household in the city. I think we have, yeah, we have one that goes out, I think May, the next one's May. So perfect timing, I think. We could get something in the next connections. It goes out mid-May, I think, right, Allie? So we could do that. So we could base it, effective date of the ordinance based on when we could get enough information out. We could send a mailer to all of our businesses that we believe would be using this ordinance for outdoor amplified sound. Allie, anything else you can think of?
No, thank you for mentioning that. I do think, we'll do a lot of direct communication straight to the businesses by email and mail, which is really important. In addition to all the other broad tools that we use in general, we'll update the FAQ. We've got a section on the website that we'll obviously update with frequently asked questions and forms and all the pieces.
Ms. Nosler-Beck and then Ms. Hoppy.
Can we just, because there's an impact to business license holders with this, can it just go out to all of our businesses in Wheat Ridge? Because, there's businesses that might be hosting an event. It might not be a restaurant or a place that usually has music, but because it could impact their business license. I just think it's important that they know this.
Yeah, I mean, if a couple of different ways we could handle it. Again, the connections does go to every business. I don't know if they're more apt to read that or a letter that comes from the city. We have an email blast that we can send to. I don't know if we have every business on that, but we have a pretty good email blast that goes to most businesses. We could send a letter to every business in the city also. If that's something you guys would like us to do, but hopefully they'll read one of the things that they get.
Well, and I just because I heard from some businesses that they didn't know about the noise ordinance. I just would love it if we could point to like an email that was specifically about this one issue that we can say, you got that. So anyway, I think you guys get it. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
Ms. Hoppy?
I'm concerned that we still haven't addressed the being able to have a non-live music at your restaurant. So like being able to have music on your patio, I feel like we still haven't addressed that, and I think it's important. And so is there a suggestion on how we would address that, Mr. Goff?
Well, we could change the definition. I think we may open a can of worms. I'm not sure if we can. I'd hate to try to create a new definition tonight at 9:17. I think we may.
Could we make an exception? Could we do an exception for satellite music, jukebox, like that type of music? Can you do an exception for that?
For outdoor?
Yeah, you can have satellite music or your jukebox playing on your patio. Like, can we make an exception like that?
Well, and we do have, again, we have the one clarification or exception that if it's not audible 50 feet away from the property line, maybe we could increase that to 100 feet. So maybe that would capture more of those other sources of music that you're talking about. I don't know. I don't know if the chief has any idea based on the complaints they get. I don't know, 50 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet. I don't know what that's going to capture and not going to capture.
Ms. Dozeman, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So the way I'm interpreting this is so long as it's not an amplified form of sound, then right? Sorry, bud, you laughed there, but I mean, if it's live music and there's no amplification, then it's not falling under this purview, correct?
Well, if it comes out of the speaker that's, amplified in my office, my back office, then it's background music, it's music on the porch, but it's amplified sound.
And jukeboxes would be considered amplified sound, I would believe.
Okay. However, I think what Ms. Dozeman's asking is like like somebody with their guitar that's not plugged into like something.
Acoustic.
That doesn't. It's
acoustic.
Yeah, it doesn't count, but the jukebox does, and so I feel like there needs to be a way for us to address this. I can tell you, I've worked in restaurants where we weren't allowed to have music on the patio, and I've worked in restaurants where we were allowed to have music on the patio, and we constantly, at the restaurant that I worked at where you couldn't have music on the patio, people were constantly asking us for music on the patio. So I feel like we need to address this somehow.
Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's without opening a can of worms. I mean, I feel like we've got the 50-foot specification that currently exists. And, you know, in my mind, ex-real estate agent, you know, 50 feet is like the width of a standard real estate property, and not in Wheat Ridge where we have no standards. But, you know, I think if we extend it to 100, chances are we're not hugely impacting people. And I think a lot of what we're talking about is like a guitarist with like a small amp to be heard on the patio. And I think in general, that's not the type of noise that is generally impacting neighborhoods. And as we've said many times tonight, we're all recognizing this is an ordinance I'm confident we're going to talk about again before my term is up, if we need to revisit that. But I think what Mayor Starker's talking about, you know, is the sort of ambient music that a lot of our restaurants have that isn't necessarily impacting the quality of life of the adjacent neighborhood. So I'd like to ask for a consensus that we change that to 100 feet from 50 feet.
Consensus for 100 feet there. It looks like we have consensus on that. All right. I
think that might be it, Mr. Mayor.
Number of consensuses there. We've have we thoroughly vetted this issue at this time? I mean, this is going to have legs to it, so we're going to have some more discussion on this. Mr. Goff, do you think you've got enough direction in order to go back and with Mr. Dahl and Chief Murtha and the other smart people we have in our city, bring back a new ordinance?
I would just like to ask Chief Murtha if you know him and his department are the ones that have to enforce this out on the street. If there's anything that he's concerned about before we call it an evening, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. We're constantly finding areas of this ordinance that we're challenged with today. For example, one of our supermarkets, we had complaints that their COVID safety announcement, which was being broadcast in the parking lot, was violating the ordinance. We had to go over and we were able to negotiate with the business, and they unplugged it. At this point, we think everybody knows safe distancing and washing their hands, but that was one we didn't anticipate. So as you go forward, I think for our direction, we just would like to know how you want us to enforce it, either through decibel readings or through reasonableness. Either way works fine for the police department. There's going to be somebody happy and somebody unhappy each time we do that. We currently have a decibel reader, and we go out and we see where it sits with regard to the table that we use that was created under this ordinance, to see what actually is happening with the noise. When our officers go out for complaints about unreasonable noise, that's really a subjective place, and it puts us in a difficult position because their idea of reasonableness may not be the residents, may not be the business owner's idea of reasonableness. So just looking for direction there. I hesitate to say, but I think half of my complaints end up in one of your inboxes. So I'm trying to eliminate some of our complaints ending up in your inbox. But I don't know that there's a perfect way to do that through enforcement. But clarification of those was much appreciated of the current ordinance. And then as we go forward, just direction on how you want us to enforce it from that perspective of decibels versus reasonableness.
Well, today it's reasonableness, and we didn't change it this evening. The only decibel level that we have, just to remind everybody, is for the industrial zone property. And And for when you have a permit, when you do pull a permit, you can't be over 75 decibels.
Right. We're sampling around these other businesses. For example, we got complaints about a range and some of their noise, and people are interpreting things. They're reading into the ordinance the way they want to read into it. So we have to kind of unscramble that. But we are using the reasonableness standard for most of our complaints right now. So we'll continue to use it unless we get a different direction.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Any, I guess, any additional discussion on this item? Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Very quickly, staff, please remember when you're evaluating the process for special use permits that liquor licenses are tied to not just a business or a premises, but to a specific area that has to be outlined in a map. So if you have a special use permit, you would need to make sure that the liquor license and the special use permit line up. That's all I wanted to say.
Mr. Stites.
This was probably answered, sorry. Are the special use permits and the permits, so are they tied to the property or to the business? Sorry, because what if multiple businesses share the same property? Could they all apply for different permits under that?
To the business,
They certainly could. They certainly could, and hopefully the beauty of a special use permit process, because it's not something you're entitled to, and so it can be layered with conditions. It might well be that one doesn't get issued if there's already other permits, you know, on that same strip center, for example, so that you'd have, in the judgment of the persons issuing the permit, either Ken Johnstone or the council, that's frankly too much. And you might be in the position of saying no to numbers 2, 3, and 4, just because of that. And it absolutely doesn't run with the land unless you say it does. With these kinds of permits, it's much more likely that the condition that the staff will recommend is that it be personal to the applicant and stick with the applicant, because it's the applicant that's saying, you can trust me, this is my business model, we'll never do the wrong thing, and that's fine, and you probably can. But if they sell that business to someone else, it's someone else, and that someone else can certainly apply and get another permit, and that's fine, but it does give you the opportunity to bring that someone else in for an application.
Thank you. Additional discussion on this item? Pretty well vetted at this point. Okay, well, Ms. Weaver.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I had one other question that kind of goes with Mr. Stites. As far as the allowed number of, I'm not going to say the right word, up to the number of 6 or 8.
It's 8.
What?
It's 8 based on your consensus tonight.
What are they called? They're not special use permits. What are they? They're event
amplified sound events permits.
Amplified sound events. I'm not saying I would do this, but are we worried that someone will apply for a week of bands? You know, is it okay that they use all 6 or all 8 or whatever, all in the same? Because I was just thinking through that there's really only 8 months that you can have outdoor music. So just a thought.
The way the ordinance is currently drafted, yes, they could use all 8 in 1 week.
Okay, thanks.
Or 1 week and 1 day.
That would be the Woodstock provision. Ms. Hopkins.
We certainly could look at changing it so that you can't use more than 2 in a row, or put some sort of condition on it like that if anyone feels like that's something they want to do.
Well, remembering again, it's a permit that can be conditioned.
No, Jerry, we're talking about the first 8.
Okay. Yeah, the Woodstock provision applies. I agree with the mayor.
Okay. Additional discussion, or are we ready to let our staff and legal counsel get back and do some work on this and bring it back to us? Let's let you all go do some work and bring us back your best work on this, and we'll take another shot at it if that sounds all right. I want to thank everybody for a lot of brain power.
Well, are you suggesting this comes back to study session, or do you want it to come back to first reading?
Discussion on council. Do you think we're ready, Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think when we were talking about trying to make that May connections, that we would really be needing to look at bringing it to first reading in order to make that deadline. Am I correct in my, I'm really bad at calendar math, so.
Yeah, we could get it based on tonight's consensus, we could get an article in the May edition. But yeah, I mean, we'd want to be careful. If it's not fully adopted yet, we want to just say the council's considering this, but yeah, let's see. I'm looking at my calendar here. Sorry, give me a second.
Patrick, if I might, the chapter 26 zoning code amendments will need to go to the planning commission for a public hearing. So, that is not going to happen until May, which pushes this council consideration into June. I mean, we'd have to look at dates a little more carefully, but just don't want to forget that planning commission process.
For the special use permit?
Correct.
If you consider that this permit we're inventing has to be a quote special use permit in the same way that a chapter 26 special use permit is, it's really a permit for an activity a little differently. I mean, it can be seen as a permit for an activity, kind of like a business activity that doesn't necessarily have to be considered a use. I recognize that we consider these, and Ken has said that we consider these as an accessory, amplified activity as an accessory use. And so it fits into the land use scheme, but it also has attributes that really aren't as classically land use special use permits too. That's maybe a discussion we could have at staff level to kind of figure out how to characterize this as a permit system, whether it's just a pure special use permit a la chapter 26 and fine, or whether it's a kind of a slightly different version of that.
Looking at the calendar, I don't think honestly we can get a public hearing and approval done before our deadline for the connections anyway. So we can take our time if we need to.
Okay. I just want to add to that. Please don't hate me, my beloved peers. It dawns on me with the time frame that we're talking about based off of needing to go to planning commission and some of the delays by the time that this would be enacted. We may have businesses in our community that have already hosted 4 or 5 events, and then they would be eligible to, I don't know if that means that then they would be able to host 8 more the rest of the year. So I would want to make sure whatever language we're looking at adopting roughly halfway through the year isn't creating a loophole there. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but as we're talking, I think there is a difference between adopting this in early May versus in June in terms of how many of those permits might be issued and used by our businesses. So,
and that's originally why we used the rolling 12 months, because it was adopted mid-year last year, and it was difficult.
Are we able to just say, like, for 2021, any permits already applied and issued will apply towards the 8 allowed in 2021?
We can craft a transitional section.
Okay.
I'm certain of it, that recognizes permits that have been issued prior to the effective date of this ordinance. And I'm certain we can cook up a transitional provision that gets us through 2021.
Okay, I think that's important because that, especially from some of the people we really heard from, if that loophole creates that problem, This is going to be a hot mess quickly again. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Jerry.
Then our plan would be to bring this back on first reading. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion on this agenda item number 2? Okay, we will close on agenda item number 2. Thank you very much. That concludes the 2 action items. We will now go to staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Nothing this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Elected officials reports. If you have something, just to raise your hand. Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Very quickly, we have openings right now on the Liquor License Authority Board, the Board of Adjustment, and the Cultural Commission. And so we will be advertising to fill those rather quickly. But I wanted to alert council that we will be looking for volunteers.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple quick things. If Ken's still listening, I'd like to thank Ken and Greg Knudsen and others for hosting the Wadsworth District meeting about 10 days ago. It was very informative. We did record it, and hopefully that recording will be made available. There were a lot of great questions, and I just really want to thank them for their time. I am hosting my every other month district meeting on Saturday the 17th at 9:30 a.m. and hopefully that'll be on the city calendar soon. And then lastly, Councilwoman Weaver and I had been working with Parks and Rec and our sustainability director to apply for a conservation district grant to improve some programming at Happiness Gardens and help promote more partnerships between our community partners and our market growers for growing more local food. And we found out this week that we were awarded the grant. So I just want to thank Ms. Weaver and city staff for all their good work on that, and makes me really excited that we're going to be giving more attention to Happiness Gardens. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional elected officials reports. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, everyone, for their hard work tonight, and thanks to all the staff for everything that you put together so that we could talk about this. And real quick, Councilmember Happy, it's getting late. Councilmember Happy and I are hosting a town hall on lessons learned and our path forward with COVID on April 13th at 6 p.m. And that's going to be on a virtual platform. You can email us directly if you have some questions for some of our leaders in the COVID space that are going to be joining us. Some of the folks that will be there will be County Treasurer Jerry DiTullio, Dr. Comstock from Jefferson County Health, and Susan Miller from Jeffco Schools. So April 13th, 6 p.m. See you on another Zoom call.
Okay, thank you. Additional elected officials matters. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank you for all the work that we did tonight. I want to thank those citizens and residents that came and talked to us and spoke to us. We appreciate your comments. A couple of announcements here. On Saturday, this coming Saturday, April the 10th, I will host a coffee with the mayor at 9 o'clock virtually. Let's see, we have Drug Take Back Day on April 24th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Lutheran Medical Center on 38th Avenue. We'll be able to get rid of your old and outused and drugs that you would like to get rid of in a safe manner. So take a look at that. And then my only other thing is that I would like to wish a very happy 100th year young birthday to Ira Muriel Frink in District 1. She will be turning 100 years old tomorrow. So thank you very much to her. And if there's no more work to go before the council for the study session, we will plan to meet next Monday night at 7 o'clock in our regular session. And with that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you all so much. Good night.